But
we
it
are
is
so
properly
glad
posted.
you're able to join us from Los Angeles this morning.
Thank you.
All right, I think we can try this one more time. It looks like we've settled our technology issues. Good morning. Forgive my hacking and coughing. I'll apologize for that. My name is Jolena Grande, and it is my pleasure to serve this year as the chairperson for the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee. I'd like to thank everyone here as well as in Los Angeles for joining us today. I know that it's Thanksgiving week, and for some that means time off from work. For the rest of us, we understand that travel is an issue to get here, so we thank our friends in Los Angeles for making the trek there. Today's meeting is being broadcast. Interested parties can view the broadcast by visiting http://cde-ca.videossc.com, or you can find the link on our California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee webpage. Today's meeting is also a teleconference with the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, so I'll take a moment to ask the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce staff to introduce themselves and verify the posting of the public meeting notice. That would also include our ex officio member, David Rattray, who's joining us from Los Angeles, as well as our Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee member, Alma Salazar. So can you confirm for us that you have posted the public meeting notice and the facility is open and available for guests to attend and participate?
Chair Grande, we can confirm that the meeting has been posted, available to the public, and open to whomever would like to join us.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alma and David. So I believe we do indeed have a quorum, and it is 10:50, so I will call this meeting to order. Our very first agenda item is the approval of the meeting minutes from our November 7th, 2019 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes from November 7th?
I'll move to approve.
Thank you so much, Member Rawlings. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you so much, Member Rucker. Are there any comments, changes, corrections that need to be made to the minutes from our November 7th meeting? Hearing none. Very well. Are there any comments from members of the public regarding our meeting summary from November 7th? Very good. Seeing none there, I believe we're ready to go to the roll call vote. Is there a member of our CDE staff that wants to take the roll for us? Thank you, Lisa.
Yes, ma'am. Chair Grande.
Aye.
Member Rawlings.
Aye.
Member Rucker.
Aye.
Member Salazar.
Aye.
And Vice Chair Sutton.
Aye.
Thank you.
The approval of the minutes from November 7th, 2019 have passed. The meeting minutes, along with the recording of the broadcast from November 7th, as well as the previous meetings of the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee, are available on our webpage. Okay, we're ready to move to the meeting documents for today's agenda. I would like to introduce in person Lisa Reimers from the California Department of Ed. She's going to review for us our materials provided for this meeting. What you got for us, Lisa?
Yes, good morning, members of our advisory committee. You will have in your packets an agenda, the report of action that you just approved from November 7th. On yellow paper, we have our updated guiding policy principles document that you all approved at the last meeting. You will also see agenda item number 1 with a slide deck. There's quite a few attachments with this. You have 2 large books. Attachment 1 is the state plan with track changes. So the blue highlighted text are the things that are being proposed to be removed, and the yellow are the new additions. You also have attachment 2, which is a clean version, because after we did all the highlighting, we found out that there was a lot of changes. So we gave you a clean version if you just wanted to start over. Attachment 3 are the page references. There are 2 columns on this, so whichever document you choose to work from, either attachment 1 or attachment 2, those page numbers are listed in those columns for you. Attachment 4 is a timeline. And then we also had an addendum that was posted last week that had 2 two wordsmithing, language differences that were not added by the time we posted the big document. And it's only about 4 pages, 4 pages, so it's small. And that is all of your documents for today.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I appreciate that. And I'll draw everyone's attention to the yellow handout where we added item L, strong partnerships with industry, to our previous list of our essential elements of a high-quality college and career pathway. Very well. We are ready to move to our first agenda item, which is a second reading and review of the Perkins 5 State Plan, our federal application to the United States Department of Education for funds to fulfill the requirements for the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act. And I think we can get started by welcoming Pradeep Kotamaraju from the California Department of Education, who is going to share with the committee the progress on the development that we've made to date on the California Perkins 5 State Plan. Pradeep will also be joined by Russ Wilkie and I believe Shenny Weber, who are going to help facilitate today's conversation.
Chair Grande, I think to start the proceedings, we will have Shani Weber and Kai Jackson come up here and make some introductory remarks.
Good morning, members. My name is Kai Jackson, Deputy Superintendent for the Equity and Access Branch.
Hi, good morning. I'm Shani Weber, Vice Chancellor for Workforce and Economic Development with the California Community College's Chancellor's Office.
And we just want to take a few minutes before we kicked off today's meeting to, on behalf of the State Board staff, the Community College staff, and the CDE staff, to really show our appreciation and thank you for your leadership and your guidance, your thoughtful inquiries as we begin to put this plan together. We have brought some of our best thinking to the plan between our staffs, and they have worked very diligently to incorporate your comments and those of the stakeholders. And so as we look over the horizon, we're before you today to present the second reading of the draft plan in order that it would go to public comment upon potential improvement today.
Chair Grande, Co-Chair Sun, and members of the committee, I want to echo Kai's remarks and thank you for all your guidance and your input into this development of the federal application. I think staff has worked very hard to pull this together in the, as you understand, a very challenged timeline. And in a lot of ways, this has been a really good learning exercise for all of us, given that we're all learning institutions. It's been a good dry run in some ways for us to work together and collaborate. And I think this is a good beginning of the direction that you have helped move us in, and the collaboration of the two systems. And I think this will be a great foundation for us as we move forward to build the state plan for CTE. So we do appreciate your patience and the work that you have put before us, and we appreciate the support that we've received. And I want to thank staff for all the hard work that they've done.
I echo that. The incredible staff work that has gone into this, along with the work that you have led as well, Deputy Superintendent Jackson and Vice Chancellor Weber. We could not sit here and look at these items today had it not been from all of the labors that went into this. We'll call it a labor of love, but it truly is a testament to working throughout the system. So thank you both so very much.
Thank you, ma'am. And we'll turn it back over to Pradeep Kotamaraju.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Grande. Good morning, Vice Chair Sun, and good morning, members. My name is Pradeep Kotamaraju. I'm the Director of the Career and College Transition Division, and I will be presenting the material today and discussing with you the Perkins 5 State Plan. And to facilitate the discussion, Russ Wilkie, who you all know, will be Wested employee for a day, and will do that and facilitate for us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So So basically, the presentation overview would be talking about the Perkins 5 Plan, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act. We'll be discussing the plan. We'll explain to you the process for incorporating your feedback from November 7th, particularly from the November 7th meeting, but also from previous meetings as well. We will cycle through each of the major prompts, and we'll give you a brief content overview, and then we'll indicate to you what the significant type of changes are in the document. And then we'll have a facilitated discussion. One of the things I would indicate to you that we've, for the program administration and implementation section, we've broken the facilitation out into different parts. If from the document, that particular prompt covers about 100 pages in the document. So we wanted to break that up so we could have a discussion of subparts of that and subsections of that as we go through. We will then talk about how we've proceeded forward with having discussions about the public comment, and we'll then lay out in summary fashion the timeline that will ensue should you approve the plan that's in front of you. So how did we go about incorporating the feedback? We took 23 pages of notes last time, thanks to Rachel Moran and Lisa Reimers, and we took those notes. I and my staff took an initial pass of those edits to incorporate that within the plan, and then we shared the document concurrently with the Chancellor's office, and they made review and comment, and then we shared this the changes with the State Board of Education staff, and once that was all done, we then gave a document to Wested, that basically the comprehensive center that went through the document and made further editorial changes into that. They also looked at 508 compliance as we went through, and then within CCTD, we also made sure that we followed the guidelines for the correspondence guides that we follow within the California Department of Education. As we go through this document, I would suggest that you look at the clean copy, because as we said, there were many changes, and going back and forth in that document might be a little tougher. So we go through the clean copy, and then we'll come, and if you have some suggestions, if you want to go back and look at the track changes, we can do that as well. But I think just for ease and flow of conversation, the clean copy is the one that we will be making reference to. So just to remind you, these are the major prompts that we have to address within the Perkins 5 state plan development and consultation, the state's vision for education and workforce development, CTE programs of study and implementation, meeting the needs of special populations, preparing teachers and faculty, fiscal responsibility, accountability for results, budget, and separately coming up with the state-determined performance levels, which is included within the accountability for results. We then have a whole list of glossaries. We have appendices, a couple of appendices that have a list of items within those appendices. The first set of appendices refer to what I will call state appendices, like the guiding principles and the essential elements, the advisory committee, the different dates that we've had. We talked about the state plan stakeholder group and the list of public hearing dates and locations. And the second set of appendices has to do with the federal requirements, appendices that we have to include in that. Some of these were included within the transition plan, and we need to update that in terms of dates. Dates, and some of the critical piece in here is the waiver that we seek for under Section 132 distribution formula, and we have that as a separate appendices. Before we actually get into the meat of the presentation, I would like to extend my thanks to Patricia DeCoste and Pam Kesselman for tightening up and fine-tuning the document. I would also like to thank the West End Comprehensive Center for shaping up the document for where it is right now, and my thanks to the CCD staff, particularly Lisa Reimers and Anna Katrina Rasmussen, to go through the document multiple times to make sure that we have it in presentable form for you. So let's start with plan development and consultations. So basically what we did was this whole prompt talks about how we went about doing the stakeholder key informant consultations. We started off, one of the things that you will see in the document that is new for you is essentially we put a previous section in there that talked about the guiding policy principles and started with that. We introduced a joint management team that consists of CDE staff, state board staff, and the chancellor's office staff. We talked about, in that prompt, we talked about stakeholder meetings and key informant, and we talked about the amount of uses of funds and who has the roles of responsibility and the distribution of funds. We mentioned about the public comment, as I mentioned that, and then if you look at the bottom of the slide, these are in November 7th, these are the items that you asked us to address under this prompt. One was making the distinction between stakeholders, key informants, and the public in the document, and we did that. We talked about the expanded to multiple venues that included key stakeholder groups, for example, teachers and community college administrators. And as per your recommendation, we included a discussion about the distributions of funds under this and how those funds were distributed under this section. So we'll stop right here and then we'll begin the consultation.
Good morning. So as Pradeep said, you have two documents. Attachment 1 is the document that has track changes in it, and attachment 2 is the clear version that doesn't have the track changes. The suggestion is that you would use that to go through. It's easier to read. And then if you need to refer back, you can refer back to attachment 1, which is the track changes. But as I go through this, I'll give you the page numbers for both documents, if that's helpful to you. So we're first want to take a look at the introduction and preview, and in your track changes document, that's pages 8 through 10. In your clear version, that's pages 4 through 6. So any concerns or comments on introduction and preview?
I would just mention that I appreciated the fact that our introductory or preamble section really set the stage for what was coming afterwards. And I appreciate the narrative that begins the entire plan application. So kudos to those who drafted it to add it for our inclusion. Thank you.
Okay, great. So no further comments. We'll look at stakeholder involvement, and that's in the clear version on pages 7 through 10. If you have to go back to track changes, it's 11 through 15. Any comments, concerns on stakeholder involvement? And do we have any comments from LA as well?
Oh, thank you for reminding me. I should keep asking whether
Yeah,
or not
yeah.
David and Alma have anything to add to our conversation. Let's go back to the first section
Okay.
that we did not
Let's
get a
do
chance
that.
to ask them about. Alma and David, are there any comments on the introduction and preview?
No, none for me.
No,
Thank you very much.
not at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, and now we're on stakeholder involvement, either here in Sacramento or in LA. Any comments, concerns?
record?
All right, so I just want to say that I appreciate the improvement on the narrative to talk about the additional work that was done to reach out to particular stakeholder groups and specifically with the educators. And I do want to remind you that we had a really significant and intense conversation about the composition of the statewide advisory group, because there is only one identified teacher on that statewide advisory group. And so it is important, while it does say that this process of stakeholder engagement is something that is not new and a long-standing practice for California, I think that going forward, we still have, it's clear from what it says about who is on that stakeholder group, we still have a lot of work to do to figure out how to work with our LEAs to get them to support the involvement of teachers in this process. So due to no fault of the state, but really because LEAs do not understand that critical importance of LEAs supporting teachers being released to come and do this work, I think it's important for us to figure out how to articulate that concern going forward. I'm not sure it's necessary to write that into the plan, but I need to make sure that we are not unmindful of the fact that there is this difficulty, and this is something that we have to figure out how to address, because that does remain an unanswered concern.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Sun.
Can I make a suggestion to Russ? As you're going through this, first of all, slow down just a little bit, because there's a lot of pages to kind of flip through, and I have my comments. And then if you could say, then reference the page numbers. So when you're at a place, say pages 15 through 39 or something, because I've got these and I'm flipping through my electronically where I may have some comments.
Yep, okay.
May I ask, on page 9 of the clean copy, where we have the reference to the California Community College Association for Occupational Education, that we do a find and replace, it's not of, but for. So it's in CCC AOE, it's the California Community College Association for Occupational Education and not of Occupational Education. Well, no, it's still CCC AOE, but because the O is for occupational, but the word is for. And then also about, I would say maybe 10 lines from the bottom, it says, in addition, CDE and COCCC staff. I think that's supposed to be the O at the end of that rather than the O in the second letter. I'm guessing, because throughout up to that point, it's been 4 C's and an O, and not COCCC, unless all of a sudden there's a different group that it's referencing and I didn't catch the.
No, it is referencing
Okay.
the Chancellor's Office staff. It's just a typo there.
Very good. Thank you so much. And then towards the bottom of the same page, it says a complete list of the SSAC, the CCC AOE participants, and secondary teacher participants is provided in Appendix A. Is that the current Appendix A, or it will be an elaborated Appendix A? Because there were a number of people at CCC AOE that participated, and I don't see all of their names listed in Appendix A, but I was just wondering, is that what it was intended to be, an entire list of the participants?
As I was reviewing this document, I think I saw that myself, and I think we'll make adjustments to that, and also also include some of the teachers separately in that. So we'll have expanded that, maybe have it Appendix A1, A2, A3, so we'll have separate ones for that. So we'll
I appreciate that because I think it would indicate, if we have a list of all the participants from CCC AOE, how vast the feedback was there in terms of making sure we had faculty, staff, administrators. It just was a very robust conversation that took place.
What I do have and what we do have is the list of those individuals who participated in the pre-conference session, but in the in the afternoon sessions that we talked about the Perkins legislation, we didn't take down the names for that, but it's in the pre-conference session we have that.
Yes, and that's where we had that incredible conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're looking at section pages 7 through 10, stakeholder involvement.
Anything further on that section? No. All right.
Okay, let's move on to distribution of funds. This is in your document, page 10 through 12. And if you're looking at the track changes, it's pages 15 through 17.
Thank you so much, Russ, for giving us those page numbers.
Absolutely.
Are there any comments from Los Angeles on the last section? I forgot to go back and ask them about it, or for this section.
That's quite all right, Chair Grande. No comments from the LA team.
Thank you very much. Anything from the members? Okay.
Should we move on?
We can.
Okay, let's look at public comment. That's pages 12 through 14 in the clean document and pages 17 through 20 in the track change document.
Will we be giving everyone the December 2019 date for that Sacramento public meeting today, or will it be broadcast soon?
We actually do have that date set. We had that after the posting of the document, so we didn't want to go and change the document. But it is set for December 9th at the West Ed Comprehensive Center, and basically there are two sessions, one from 10 to 12 and the other one in the afternoon from 1 to 3. We also have another session that is set on December 2nd at Orange County Community College District Office, and that's also 10 to 12 and 1 to 3. It's actually a week from today.
Thank you for that update. Any other comments on that section? Okay.
May I also just add that we also have in the final and finishing touches of the online public survey that we are going to ask individuals to respond who cannot come. And West Ed is working on, the Comprehensive Center is working on that. And we do have a link, but I think we're trying to finalize that, and we should have that very shortly within this week. We should have that.
Very good. All right.
Okay. So
one question from LA.
Oh, please go right ahead.
This is David. I'm just wondering on page, let's see, this is page 13 of the clean document, under web-based input. In the first sentence it says that we'll see, that the reader can see all the comments made, insert link. So is that to suggest that there will be a hot link and then someone could see all the comments that were made on that the web-based input?
I think it's just for them to review and comment. It's like a survey that they will be going in and filling it out, that they will see the entire comments once it's included within the state plan.
Okay, thank you.
yeah, I don't think they'll be able to see other people's comments while they're commenting, right? No. But
once plan
we're
is final,
required, the feds require us to actually respond to every public comment within the state plan. So at the end of that public comment period, and the comments come back to us here at the state, we will be categorizing those comments and then responding to those comments. It may cause us to add something more to the state plan, take something out of the state plan, or at least respond to the commenter of why we did not include that in the state plan.
May I just suggest that just the way the survey is going to be, actually it'll follow very closely to that reference document that you're now looking at. That's how it will be. The web base is set up. They will go through each of those sections, and if they have a comment in every section, they can respond. But if they don't have a comment, they can just skip and go to the next one and just answer the one that they so choose to answer. So it follows very similar to the reference sheet that you have in front of you. So it makes it easy for us to collect the information at the back end.
Just one follow-up question to what you were just mentioning, Russ. You were referring to the state plan. Is that true, or are we looking at the comments to the federal application?
Oh, the public comment period right now will just be for the federal application.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Anything further on that section? Okay.
Just for clarification, I would say that, and you'll see that throughout the document, we refer to this because that's what the state plan guidelines from the U.S. Department of Education ask us to call it. We refer to that as the Perkins 5 state plan. So that's really how we distinguish that from the larger and more comprehensive state plan of CTE that is forthcoming after we submit the application to the U.S. Department of Education.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, then that completes Section A. We're going to move to Section B, which is Program Administration and Implementation. And we first go to pages.
Let me go through this.
Sure.
So what you have in this section that, or this, if you want to call it subsection, what we did is, if you saw from the last document, there were programs that were under different prompts. And what we did was to bring everything under this particular prompt, both the education programs, secondary, community colleges, and workforce development, all of them under this prompt. We talked about the state strategic vision, and we talked about how we went about doing the joint planning to support the vision and goals. We also had there's a discussion in there about leadership funds and what potential areas that the state may want to look at under Perkins 5 implementation, how these leadership funds could be spent both separately on the secondary side and the community college side, but also collaboratively between the two agencies to go and look at that. I think dual enrollment comes to mind, for example, to look at in that area. So there are ways in which these reserve funds can be used at, and you will see that in the document. So when you look at the state vision, what we did was, as I said, we put all the CT and workforce development program under this prompt. We sort of looked at the different vision and missions of the agencies that are involved in this plan, both the SBE vision and mission, the Board of Governors, and then we connected that through the guiding principles from this committee. We then introduced the vision, courtesy Vice Chair Sun. If you recall, Vice Chair Sun, at the second stakeholder meeting, a student came up with the original language, and then you went and refined that, and we just sort of fine-tuned that to make it more industry-focused and student-centered, and that's what that's how we came about to that vision. We described in this section, as you were referring to last time, Member Rucker, is to talk here also about the LCFF and LCAP in that, and we included that in here. We also talked a connection to the workforce development system, but since the writing of this plan, Jeff Muzek, myself, and Patricia DeCoste have been starting to have conversations with the workforce development with the state board there as they're starting to write their WEO plan for next year, and we are having conversations with them. And so we just didn't include that information, and they have also mission and vision and strategic goals, and they align quite well with what we see within this section.
All right, so we want to look right now at programs aligned to education and the skill needs of employers, and that's on your document pages 15 through 39. So I'll give you a little bit more time to look through that. And then if you want to look at track changes, it's pages 20 through 56. All right?
Thank you.
Yep.
I know that Vice Chair Sun has a comment.
It's a little bit later, so.
Okay.
How about anything from Los Angeles, Alma or David?
Chair Grande, I know that at previous meetings we had invited just some preamble language that helped connect this to future of work initiatives in the state, and I'm just curious if there's an interest in incorporating some of that language into the preamble, just so we're connecting our own dots statewide.
Is there any comment to that, Pradeep?
As I said, we're just starting to have this conversation with the state workforce board, and they did bring up the future work of discussion and that work, and so we have to see where the alignment is between that work and this. There is alignment for sure, but we're just starting to have that discussion, and maybe we'll keep that as one of the things that we will either make some changes right now, keeping in mind that we only have 1 week to make any changes for the public comment, because we can't really make some major changes in this document and the public not see that in this version as we go forward, but we'll try to at least provide a flavor for that within this section for the public comment.
Member Rucker.
And I'm comfortable with that idea. I think the discussion on the future of work is still a conversation that and a question that we on this panel still need to live with. And I think in the development of the broader state plan, as we look at how that conversation creates the linkages among the WIOA plan as well as this plan and our broader vision for the state's overall plan, that answering the question about what our priorities are in talking about the future of work can actually be more fully and probably better addressed in that plan. So I'm comfortable with your proposal on how to go forward on that for this.
This is all. I support that as well.
Thank you, Member Salazar. I just have one question regarding page 17 in the clean version. There is a reference at the very top. It looks like it might be the third sentence. The CCC is the world's largest public higher education system, which is singular. But in the following reference, it has CCC systems. Are there multiple systems that we are referring to when we're looking in the second paragraph where it has CCC systems? And if so, should we elaborate what those systems are, or is it supposed to be singular, the CCC system?
I think it's singular.
Okay. Can we make sure to do a find and replace anywhere that there's a CCC systems that we singular it? Thank you. Is there anything else on this section? Nothing?
Page 15 through 39.
Yes, Member Rucker.
I did have a comment in that same section, but I'm still not quite sure how to explain or ask, and so I'm going to rely on the expertise of the two of you standing at the podium. I'm thinking about the work or the projects that are funded separately and independently for our workforce investment boards and the type of adult education training programs that they provide that are also a part of our system of career technical education. So they are not included in this statement here. Was that on purpose because their funding or their revenue stream is separate from what is being funded and being described and directed in this plan? I mean, it's okay if that's what the answer is, but I just want to make sure that we do recognize that they are part of this overall system as well, but I know that they probably are not directly funded from this application.
We do refer to adult programs in the earlier section, and we talk about that. But in this case, I think there has been conversation between looking at some, because in Title II, there are 7 different things that they have to do. One of them is CTE, and maybe this is an implementation question as we move forward in terms of looking at can the adult schools get together as a consortium and ask for more Perkins money in that way, and looking at that. But because there are very, very little that has been used for this, but this may be an opportunity, particularly with the integrated education training where you combine academic or workplace skills with the technical education, like the IBEST model in Washington. So there are opportunities, but we weren't very explicit here.
And I wasn't asking the question to seek an amendment on that. I just wanted to make sure that we were purposeful in either deciding not to include a reference or a description of those programs because the funding is different and not directly connected here. That was what my question was, but I'm not seeking an amendment to this. That was for my clarification for my own purpose. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on this section? Okay.
Yes, so on page 38, there's a reference to page 38, the first full paragraph. In 1993, legislation was passed. I just wondered the relevance of legislation was passed 27 years ago. Is that something that is informing more of this plan? Or do we have something more updated to inform this section of the plan? And that was page 38. And it says in 1993. And if it's not, I would just recommend striking it if it's not really enhancing because that's a really old reference.
Anything else?
Further? Okay.
No? Okay, hearing no further comments. We'll move to the next section, state vision and goals for preparing a skilled workforce. Very short section, pages 40 and 41. If you look at the track changes, it's 56 through 58.
Vice Chair Sun.
So I really appreciate the work in this section of trying to craft what the state vision is. And I understand taking the SBE vision and the CCC vision and trying to make it all together. So there's a couple of things on this. The state board mission, I actually have never seen that one. And I asked state board staff about that. Where do we have this mission? Where did it come from? So my understanding is that's a pretty old vision, and we really actually don't necessarily kind of take that and enhance it. So what I'm thinking is that instead of trying to take the CCC and the SBE vision and then try to kind of craft it together into the policy principles that we have, is why don't we just take the preamble of our guiding principles and make that the vision, the state vision. Because, and I think it would be a strategic vision because it says the goal of the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee is to build connected, equitable, accessible, and high-quality K through 14 plus college and career pathways for all students by. And it provides 3 clear areas that we want to move into. So I think that might serve as our strategic vision, that without you having to say, well, this is what community college does and this is what SBE, but I think this is the one piece that we have joined together. So kind of bypassing those 2 visions and just kind of going straight to that. It's my suggestion for it.
I think that's a great suggestion. Would there be any
Member Senate,
reluctance to adopt that?
No, we will
none.
Member Salazar.
No, Chair Grande, I was just saying that we couldn't, we completely agree with Member Sun's recommendation. We couldn't agree more that the guiding principle should really be the vision statement reflected in this section.
Thank you, ma'am. Pradeep?
I was just saying, well, we can make that it's a short section, we can make that change in terms of, make it even shorter.
Anything else on these pages?
No?
Yes.
Okay, we'll move to section C, joint planning to support vision and goals, pages 42 through 47, and pages 58 through 67 in the track change document.
Have anything on this section? How about from Los Angeles? Anything on this section? Member Rucker?
I just want to stick a pin in this part of the conversation because there is a link between what is described here about the development of the LCAP and the importance of the local control funding formula and the conversation we're going to have a little later when we get to the accountability section. Because for us on the board, the accountability and the matrix of accountability that is in the dashboard defines and is one of the important drivers on the development of the LCAP. And so when we get to the accountability section, I'm going to refer back to some statements that are in this section here that need to be clarified for accountability. So I just want to make sure we put a pin in that for now.
And I couldn't agree with Member Rucker more on that. So one of the, if we pulled back a little bit, one of the things I want to be careful as we're moving through this is not obligating us, well, how do I say this? I want to be careful of implications as we're talking about this, that it aligns very clearly with our state goals and our state systems. And so anyway, I think I'm knowing I know what you're referring to, and there's a couple sections in here that's not as clear, but I think will be made more clear when we start having the accountability discussion. So we might want to come back here at some point and revisit this section.
Okay.
Clean that up.
Just one other item on page 44 of the clean copy. The second paragraph, first sentence, should be the student-centered funding formula, if we can make that correction.
Member Grande, this is Alma from Los Angeles. And I think my biggest concern with this section is I'm not sure that we've adequately answered the question. We seem to list all of the various funding streams for the systems. But it's asking for more of describing how we would do joint planning, alignment, coordination, and leveraging of funds. And do we go far enough to be able to describe that work?
How would we respond to that, Pradeep?
I would have to go back and look at the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act and look at that particular section too. And I have looked at that, but I think to answer Member Salazar's question, see where we are in terms of, and I may have to go back to some of the programs that we described under workforce development and see if there are connections. There are connections to the community college side than there are to the CDE side in this particular connection and this particular section. And we may want to highlight or bring from that section and bring it in here and talk about. For example, things like apprenticeships would be something we could talk about. But if Member Salazar has some special or particular references or points of it that she would like us to make, we'd appreciate that.
I mean, is this where we double down on that? There is currently a governance structure in this committee that has been purposefully convened for the purposes of helping to assist with joint planning and alignment and coordination, and then how this is helping to evolve into a much more broader strategic plan. I think we're already headed in that direction, so I want us to take ownership for what we're currently doing and what we plan to do. So it just seems like a missed opportunity.
Member Rucker?
I think I would agree with what Member Salazar just said, because this advisory committee was convened for the sole purpose of creating a system and a process, a norm, if you will, in this state for doing this kind of joint planning, alignment, and coordination. It may be important to mention that this was created not just by an act of the legislature, but by some very important common agreements. I think it's important to reference that and to think to this. I think also that was part of the reason why I said I wanted to stick a pin in this conversation about the accountability piece, because there is an effort to create some uniformity in this state plan so that at all levels of program accountability, all the programs will see the same common accountability, the same common purposes, the same common long-term goals. And so that's part of the reason why I also asked if we could stick a pin in this part for the accountability piece, because I think some of what Member Salazar is also looking for is ways that we uniquely highlight where those where that alignment actually will occur. And for me, a lot of the alignment is defined by how we hold the programs accountable and what the evaluation will look like.
Member Salazar and Member Rutger, this is Shani Weber. I want to thank you for asking that question. And it is very, very important. And I like to just recommend that we essentially be straightforward in responding to that. We are beginning that process, and we're just starting this joint collaboration under your direction with the new guiding principles. So it's really a work in progress, and we're starting that process. And that is something I believe we will flush out much more in the state plan for CTE in terms of how we're jointly working on leveraging funding and collaboration in moving forward.
But I think the existence of this panel and the work that we've been doing for more than a few months now, for a couple of years at least, probably should be referenced or mentioned at the outset in the opening of this section, because we're the ones, this panel is the one. I just lost my subject verb agreement, but you know where I'm going. This panel has been charged with the responsibility to work together, both with the Community College Board of Governors and the State Board, to get this plan out and coordinate the development of this plan. And this section doesn't say that anywhere, so I think it's probably important to make sure that the existence of this panel is identified in this section in answering this response. So I agree with Member Salazar's point on that.
Thank you.
Member Rawlings?
So as I hear Member Salazar's comments, as I was going through this, an area where I thought kind of alluded to it, but maybe could be a little clearer, was the third paragraph on the bottom on page 45 of the clean copy. We talk a little bit about this panel, but I think maybe we'd be able to take some of that and expand on it a little bit more, maybe be a little more specific about what our role here is as a joint advisory committee, and maybe a little more clear explanation of that might be helpful.
I know elsewhere in the document we have talked about this panel. So like we've indicated to you before, we have tried to minimize the repetition in this document, but I think this may be a case where we may have to repeat that same information here in terms of looking at that, setting up the thing and what the charge really is for this committee and how it sort of feeds into the rest of the statements in the section.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. As we're making some expansion on page 45, can we also connect between connecting the SBE, the BOG? We need a connection between them. It's missing, I think, the word "and" maybe.
I appreciate your keen eye.
I apologize for that. I was thinking that it was going to be a list, so connecting the SBE, the BOG, and the blank is and it didn't have a third item in the list, so I'm guessing it's missing a connection between connecting the SBE.
We've read it too many times. We automatically add it in there.
But I want to underscore that last line. The staff serves as professional support to the Joint Advisory Committee, and we thank you very much. We thank you very much. Anything else on this section? No? Anything from Los Angeles related to this section? Anything further, I should say? Very well.
I would still go back to the primary question and make sure that we are answering it, because I don't know that we have answered the question. So that would be my only final comment.
Thank you, Member Salazar.
All right. So if we're ready to move on, we can look at section D. That's the use of leadership funds. Again, a short section, pages 47 through 48 on your clean document, 67 through 69 on the track changes.
Vice Chair Sun?
We had a little bit of discussion around the JSPAC, and that we were looking at we know that the maximum, the $150,000, the maximum under Perkins 5, but then there was also the $50,000 for the purpose of developing statewide initiatives, recruit students. And we talked about increasing that amount. Have we looked at that a little bit and how that might work?
I think when we get together with our partners from the community college chancellor's office, we'll sit down and look at these leadership funds in terms of how when we move towards implementation and trying to look at that, where should we put those dollars in some sense. Right now, I would argue those leadership funds are used minimally within both CDE and at the community, and also the chancellor's office. They actually use more of that than we do at CDE. But I would say this is a conversation we have to have internally to sort of look at, not only JSPAC but other models out there that might be useful to have sort of a collaborative approach from the CDE as well as the chancellor's office.
Member Rucker.
I agree with your concern about this is some work that still needs to be figured out. But let me suggest that if there isn't some intent articulated in this plan, then the intent doesn't exist. And so I think that there needs to be some clarification about not only the elevating the role of the JSPAC, because I remember my trying to balance my cognitive dissonance when the presentation was made. I didn't even know this entity existed. And we're talking about leadership. I suspect that the leadership from the state, and particularly from this building, is going to be fomented and facilitated by the work from that department. So if we don't clarify our intentionality to improve and raise the profile of the work that they do, and that intent is not clarified in this leadership section, it won't happen.
Vice Chair Sun.
And to that point, maybe there is, if we're not looking at a specific amount to describe in here, that maybe a sentence is added at the end of that paragraph that states our intent, that we're in the process of reviewing our leadership funds to see where we might want to, do something. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on this section? Anything from Los Angeles on this section?
No, ma'am, not at this time.
No.
Very good.
All right, that gets us through B1. Now we're going to look at B2, which is CTE programs and programs of study implementation.
So as you look at the slide presentation, this is a very large section that talks about several things in this section. We talk about CTE programs and program study implementation. We have a whole description of the CTE programs, and then we talk about program approval, and then talk about the role of the eligible agency in different items as they go through. We have dual enrollment. We talk about stakeholder input as you in the language that we refer to stakeholders more broadly in this, at least in this section that includes not only the 11 groups but even beyond that. And then we talk about the local application. We talk about the comprehensive local needs assessment and discussion about size, scope, and quality. What we did here is, as Member Rucker, you were pointing out last time, we called out the balance between state leadership and local control in this section. We used the definitions that were provided in this section as a preamble to describing the approval process. And there's a much more formal approval process at the community college level than there is in the secondary programs. And then we expanded on the community college approval process. We also introduced here a definition of a CTE concentrator. We tightened the language around size, scope, and quality. And we had a brief description, which was in the addendum that was provided to you, about the federal program monitoring process. That I remember, Rucker, last time you were talking about accountability as being a vanguard as far as California being on the vanguard. I would submit to you that the federal monitoring that we have, at least at the CDE side, and I would say also on the community college chancellor side, is also a vanguard. At least the different states that I've worked in, we had to do that within our own shop. We could not go outside. But within CDE, we have a whole unit that looks at federal program monitoring, and the consultants then go out and actually become the content experts. And the procedural part is done by this office, and I think that's one of the things that I tried to highlight in that addendum.
And let me just say, through the chair, I think this is one of the best amended sections in the report, clarifying not only how the programs work, where the linkages are, but why they need to operate in these different ways. I think that you all are to be commended for the way that you constructed the narrative in this section. It really does go a long way toward establishing what we are setting as the standard for doing this work. And I think it will also actually better inform the broader plan that we're working on. So I really do want to commend you for this. Thank you very much.
Vice Chair Sun.
I also just looked at this on page 50 where it talks about California's aspirations for vibrant career pathways are best expressed. That's exactly, very succinctly expresses what we're doing here, and kind of goes back to the vision of using the principles as our vision, state vision, because I think that lines really, really well with that paragraph you've written there.
just to continue before we come to the facilitated discussion, I just want to complete this. Is looking. We connected the special population requirements in the plan guide to the California focus and access and equity, and through the guiding policy principles and essential elements. Well, as I said before, we expanded on the stakeholder involvement here from industry, from other groups. I think the work that's now being done under LCAP and LCFF in terms of stakeholder involvement is something that I think we on the CTE side need to study that some more and sort of find alignment there. And then we here in this section we included stakeholder comments, and we tightened up the section on the CLNA and the local application. So now we can, I just wanted to complete that before we went to the facilitated discussion.
All right, so we're looking at section 2A, description of CTE programs and programs of study on pages 49 and 50. And then in the track changes document, you'd find that on page 69 through 73.
Any comments regarding 49 and 50 on the clean documents or the alternative pages on the markup? How about anything from Los Angeles?
No, ma'am, no edits here.
All right.
Good?
Yes, sir.
All right, then let's look at program approval, academic and technical achievement, pages 50 through 62 in your clean document, pages 73 through 89 of the track changes.
Member Rawlings.
Just have a typo on the bottom of page 58. When you're defining the concentrators, California Now defines a concentrator as follows.
Guys, I did see that.
Anything else on this section? Vice Chair Sun.
Page 54, regarding the qualified CTE teachers. So we haven't had a conversation yet, and we started it a little bit around the preparation of teachers, and we talked a little bit about CTC conversations. I guess I'm just curious where we are with that part. And this is not a criticism of the work on this staff. I just want to say there are a few outstanding items that we as a state have not had more conversation that we need to, which, something we need to think about in our larger state CTE plan. But, for purposes of this Perkins application, I don't know how, I want to make sure that we're not putting something in there and preempting anything from us as we're developing some of these areas or having conversations about some of these areas. And I don't know if this particular paragraph does that, but every time we talk about the qualifications piece, it comes back to me as, we haven't had a conversation about that.
We did talk about the CT recommendations to the CTC under the section that is preparing teachers, and we added that in the amendment to the document. So this was just put here, and then maybe what we could do is to make a reference to that section that makes, and maybe we can do that as saying refer to that section of, and then one could go there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else on this section? Member Rucker.
When we get to the third bullet that says be aligned to the California CTE model curriculum standards, I find myself always saying this and needing to remind everyone, California adopted in the Common Core 2 sets of standards. The Common Core state standards for mathematics. And then the second set of standards, the full, proper, and complete title of those standards are the California State Standards for English Language Arts and it's what's important after that and that is important. It's technical subjects, science, mathematics, and technical subjects. So in the anchor standards are a very clear link to instruction of English language arts in the career technical education standards. So I think it's important to make sure the alignment covers both sets of standards, not just the model curriculum standards for CTE. So it's science, mathematics, and technical standards. That was, science, history, social science, and technical subjects. That's the second half of the title of the English language arts standards. So I think it's important to make sure that we're clearly referring to those as well.
Thank you, Member Rucker. Anything
Chair
else
Grande?
on this section?
Chair Grande?
Yes, Member Salazar.
I do have a recommendation, and maybe this is for the next iteration of this work moving forward. On page 54, where we specifically indicate what the involvement of business and industry should be, I would hope that at some point we aspire to meaningful and sustained engagement of our business partners. I think the current language sets the bar very low and thereby incentivizes certain behaviors which don't lend themselves to meaningful engagement with the employer community. So I would hope in the future that we really revisit this language and have it be much more substantive and have it reflect what we hope and aspire it will be, which is meaningful, sustained engagement with business and industry who will help guide this work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anything further on this section?
Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the next section, which is expanding CTE to special populations, pages 62 through 64, and pages 89 through 93 in the track changes.
So speaking of meeting that number 3 there, which is meeting the needs of special populations, I just started with what we addressed as your recommendation from the November 7th meeting. We talked about the different program strategies because that's what we had to address in the plan. And a key factor is we had talked about the guided pathways at the community college in the program section. So I brought that back into this. So we brought that back into this section, and we added language regarding high quality CTE courses and programs not being a bar, as you had suggested, Member Rucker, from last time. And we identified, this was a section we relied more heavily on comments from the stakeholders, and we brought that into this section, and then at the end talked about having a need for continued conversation in this area.
One comment on page 63 of the clean version in what appears to be the middle of the page. It says the Career Pathways Project also assists all CTE taxonomy of programs coded disciplines. Can we add top after taxonomy of programs in parentheses? Because we normally refer to them as CTE top coded programs. And if someone's reading through this and they're familiar with top coded programs, it will help them understand and read the sentence to completion. We may need to go back a little bit for, that's okay, Vice Chair Sun.
Sorry, I just noticed I had something on page 59.
Okay.
Sorry, going back just a little bit.
In the previous section under academic and technical achievement.
Yeah, and I do apologize for going
That's
back.
fine.
I just realized I had highlighted and didn't see it. on page 59, to facilitate the discussions at the local institutions, you say that, it says assist with the process of developing career pathway templates are made available. So I was just wondering what those templates were. Do we have templates?
Nope. Do you want to come talk?
Is that program of study? Program of study. Is that what it is?
Oh, it's for CCC. Okay, got it. It's for second post.
Well, no, it wasn't just secondary, but that was one example that they showed us, and they showed us how that was a post-secondary, and then they showed us how secondary programs can link to.
Sorry, then that's mine.
Yeah, they gave us examples.
I think that section is talking about program of study templates. And we do have these program of study templates that show the complete 4 years of high school CTE courses and academic courses laid out
Okay.
By year, and then the 2 years of community college after that.
Got it.
And they can lay that out. There are templates that are blank that a district could use to complete in cooperation and collaboration with their local community college. And there are some templates up as samples that, a community college or a high school could
Okay.
steal and try to work the same kind of a program of study.
Okay, great. Thank you. I did not realize that.
There's a lot of those on CT Online.
So I apologize. Thank you for that clarification.
And while it's probably not required, this may fall in the category of necessary, not necessary, but nice. Maybe consider in one of the appendices adding a sample copy of what the template looks like. That might prove helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe saying programs of study templates or something. I was just not sure what that was.
We require that with their annual application as well.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So anything further on our special populations section? Anything from Los Angeles on our special population section? Clean copy pages 62 through 64?
No, ma'am.
No?
Okay.
All right, let's move on. Well, let's look at employability skills, pages 64 through 66, and pages 93 through 97 in the track changes.
Comments on this section? Member Salazar, how about any comments from Los Angeles on this section?
No, ma'am.
No.
All right, that completes page 1. Let's look at CTE program awareness, pages 67 through 70, and pages 97 through 101 in the track changes.
On page 69, on the section Guided Pathways Framework, can we fix that typo for the word as?
Chair Grande, I apologize, I did miss one notation on page 66 of the plan, particularly in the section where we talk about soft skills. Increasingly, we've begun to use what we believe is stronger language, which is essential skills. Just wanted to know if maybe we could shift from soft to essential.
That seems appropriate. It's on the bottom of page 66 where soft is in quotations. Thank you, Member Salazar. Is there anything else in the section on program awareness? Anything on this section? I think we're good.
All right, let's move on to collaboration among local recipients. pages 70 through 72, and then 101 through 103 in track changes.
Any comments regarding this section? How about from Los Angeles? Anything regarding the section on collaboration? All right.
Okay. Well, let's look at using labor market data on pages 72 through 74. And it's on page 103 through 106 in the track change.
Do we have anything for this section on labor market data?
Good?
Oh, we're good.
All right. Let's look at equal access to CTE for special populations, pages 74 through 80, and pages 106 through 115 in the track changes document.
Member Salazar, is there anything on this section?
No, I apologize. It was actually in the previous section, but I didn't unmute quickly enough.
Oh, that's okay. We'll come back.
On the labor market data, I'm just curious, and obviously we cite all of the various sources that can be utilized to help inform the work. And I'm just curious if there's any consideration in terms of how we're helping institutions be able to consume that information and be able to use that information to make informed decisions around how they're moving the work forward. Does that make any sense? So just food for thought.
Member Salazar, I think one of the ways we are going to do that is, and we'll talk about this a little later, is about the comprehensive local needs assessment. And one of the 6 items that every local recipient has to address is the use of labor market information and how they will incorporate that information in their local planning process. And so I think you're right in talking about finding ways to help the LEAs and the community colleges to use that, and we're starting to have discussion about that as we move.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on this section?
74 through 80, right?
Yes, sir. Member Rucker.
If we could go to page 78 and look at the paragraph that begins, the Perkins 5 state plan is required. I can't, this paragraph is not clear to me, and I'll explain what it is I think it's trying to say, and then I'll need you to correct me because I don't understand what it's trying to say. I think the point that's being made is that the state plan is supposed to articulate and has articulated to all participating agencies the expectation about providing programs that promote equal access and do not discriminate on its face and support these students to meet the state performance levels. But what's important here is some of these expectations are new or have been elevated in importance in this year's plan. That's not what's clearly stated by this paragraph. So I know that's what we're attempting to do, and that's clearly the intent of this section and of the program. But I think what the paragraph was trying to say is that the state, in its responsibility to its participating entities, has clearly articulated the expectation that this is the elevated purpose of the programs. That's not quite what that paragraph says.
I think, again, I think this is maybe where we again make reference to more specifically to the comprehensive local needs assessment, where they would have to address that within that and their local application plan.
Right. And
using
so, but this is the paragraph where that needs to say that. It doesn't say that. And then the second sentence is just a dependent clause. It says, while state leadership requirements dictate that the state assess the needs of special populations and promote preparation for non-traditional fields and provide instructional and or support for special programs. Dot, 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 dot. I think that was the sentence where it was supposed to say the expectation about what local programs are supposed to do. Right. That would have been the thought that would have finished that sentence. Perfect. So I think that's the reason why that point is missing in the paragraph, I think.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Anything else on this section?
No?
Let's check in with Los Angeles. Anything else on this section?
No, ma'am.
All right.
Okay, moving on. Secondary, post-secondary collaboration. This may take a while. It's page 80. Oh, and then in track changes, it's page 116 through 117. It just flows a little bit across both pages.
Anything on this section?
It's actually local development of career pathways on page 80. Right.
Okay.
Nope, we're good.
Nothing on this section.
Anything from Los Angeles?
Again, I think just, and I feel that it would be repetitive, but again, I think the work that this body is doing to help facilitate that, I think is worth mention as an opening preamble.
Okay.
Thank you, Member Salazar.
Great. Let's look at secondary post-secondary collaboration now, pages 81 through 83 and 117 through 120.
Do we have anything on this section? Not yet.
I just worry a little bit that it's implied but not explicit. I would just come back to, did we answer the question? And again, I think it's just more of how it's written and just taking ownership that we are, in fact, trying to elicit and invest in strong collaborative efforts.
Thank you, Member Salazar. Okay.
So let's move on now to Section 7, improve outcomes and reduce performance gaps for all CTE concentrators, pages 84 through 86, and pages 121 through 125 of track changes.
Vice Chair Sun.
Paragraph in the California law, page
85.
5. Yes. Yeah, that paragraph under California California state law, every LEA must adopt an annually update, and it goes down to a sentence. In other words, there's a sentence, how developing the Perkins 5 CLNA, the process for building plans using, it's just an awkward sentence. How developing the Perkins 5 CLNA, it's like one of those dependent clauses. The process for building the local application plans using information from CLA and implementing the Perkins 5 accountability program, all connected to the LCAP.
will be a subject for future discussions. Is that a listing or is that?
Yes.
So the idea here was to try and sort of connect essentially the comprehensive local needs assessment to.
That last LCAP, separating the subject.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
So there were three parts to the subject in that sentence.
Yeah.
Developing the Perkins Plan, the process for building,
Uh-huh.
and I'm not on mic, I'm sorry. I forgot to turn on my mic, let me go back. So there's three parts to the subject of that
Yes.
sentence. Developing the Perkins Plan, the process for building the local application, and implementing the framework. How all of that connects to the LCAP. That should not be a comma after that LCAP.
alternate will be a,
Will be a.
okay.
All right, so it's not parallel in construction, and so
Correct.
that's what makes it
Yes.
difficult to follow.
Yeah.
So, it's not I'm sure the public will give you some ideas for how to refine that sentence. It's not necessary. We understand what the three pieces they're trying to talk about. That's going to be a continuing conversation. And maybe because this is in the passive voice instead of the active voice, I would have written that the CDE, the SBE, and the community college, as well as all stakeholders, are still continuing the conversation on these 3 points.
Yes.
That's how I would have written it.
Yes.
But I think there are some folks in the public who will even have a better way of writing that. So for purposes of releasing it for the public comment, we don't have to revise that today. We understand what you are saying. But I do want to go back to that first sentence in that paragraph. You already said that you have to annually update it. You don't need to add that part after the and.
Yeah, that does the other one too. Yeah, and I mean, if there's just a different way of phrasing it and just making it clearer, I think when it goes out to public, it just would be helpful that, it's a little bit more clear, understandable.
The reformed and required high school English teacher in me always wants to write in the active voice instead of the passive. This is an example of how the passive voice gets you into trouble.
That is what my English teacher taught me to.
You have two English teachers here, so.
Anything from Los Angeles on this section?
No, ma'am.
All right.
All right. We'll move on to the next section, D, dual enrollment, pages 86 through 90, and pages 125 through 130 on the track changes.
Is there any way we might be able to, on page 86 of the clean version, give a footnote for that West Ed study from 2016? Just a link to that study for anyone who may have questions regarding it. Anything else on this section? Anything from Los Angeles on this section?
I'm curious, Chair Grande, and I know this is probably going well beyond the scope, so by all means, team, feel free to push back. Do we have a target as it relates to dual or concurrent enrollment that we've set either as an agency or as a board? I'm just curious if we were to kind of measure our success, for a certain time period in the future, how do we know that we were successful in achieving success in this particular element, if that makes any sense? And maybe it is beyond the scope, so by all means, feel free to push back. But I appreciate that in this section, we're talking about ways in which we're helping to facilitate the policies that we have passed and the way that we're systematizing the inclusion of dual enrollment and concurrent enrollment. I'm just curious, though, do we have an aspirational goal? And if we are successful in achieving said goal, do we know when we've gotten there? That's all.
Member Salazar, as one of the requirements under the Perkins 5 accountability indicators, there are 5 indicators on the secondary side. The one of them is called a quality indicator, and meaning California, is choosing the college credit course, which is in the CCI, that is going to be used as our quality indicator. One of the issues that we have in that is that right now we only have 1 year of data, which is 2018, and the students that are at the prepared level are at 8.6%. So it's 8.6% of students that, and if you add the approaching prepared to that, you add an additional 4% to that. So about 12% would be, but it's only 1 year, and that's why when we discuss this later on, you'll see that as a blank, and I'll have, hopefully when it's released in 2 weeks, we'll have a second year of data, or 3 weeks when the dashboard is released, we'll have some more data, or 1 more year of data. But right now, data is the big constraint here in trying to collect that, and we have to come up with a way of projecting that as we move forward. But to answer your question shortly, we have that as a measure to see how successful California has been in that arena.
Member Rucker.
And as it relates to that, Member Salazar, that was the pen that I was actually speaking to concerning the accountability section. At the risk of appearing pedantic, it would be really important to explain both what are our long-term and interim goals for students to meet. And these are already ambitious goals that have been set by the state. And so that was the point that I wanted to make when we get to the accountability section. And it's directly related to the point that you just raised, Member Salazar, about understanding and articulating what our goals are. We have them. We've established them. They're not just, we have both the long-term goals, the interim goals, and the expectation that districts in writing their plans have to articulate exactly what programs and services they are going to provide to address meeting those goals. And so when we get to the accountability section, you will see we didn't quite spell that out or create an aligned explanation about those goals. And so that's the point that I want to make sure we really explore when we get to the accountability section. And I think that will resolve your concern when we do that. But Dr. K was right on point on where that data is from and how we're going to use that data to explore it, and the fact that these are still evolving accountability metrics. It's important to explain that as well. I do.
No, this is Dr. K. I like it.
Thank you.
We're friends now.
But if you recall, there was a doctor in Michigan also called Dr. K.
Yes. Kevorkian.
Yes.
Okay, I won't use that anymore.
Anything else on this section? Okay.
All right, we're done with dual enrollment. And we can look at stakeholder input, page 90 through 94. And in the track changes document, pages 130 through 135.
Do we have any questions or comments on this section? How about from Los Angeles?
No, ma'am.
Member Rucker?
Okay, so I do have a question concerning the last sentence in this section on page 94. The consensus from teachers was for the state to align CTE initiative data requirements with the indicators of performance as required in Perkins 5. So in having that statement, does that mean we're going to make a decision to do that? Or are we simply going to live with that suggestion for a little while?
We would live with it within this plan, the Perkins 5 plan, but we need to discuss that in the larger statewide plan in terms of how it connects to all of the different state programs in terms.
I think you should say that decision will be reserved for the larger statewide plan. I think it would be important to make that because ending the section that way without saying what we're going to do with that recommendation leaves us open for criticism during the public comment. So to say we intend to consider this in developing the broader statewide plan, simply if it's not a problem to add that sentence, I think that would be a good idea.
Good point.
Is there anything else on this section? How about from Los Angeles?
No, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to page 94 through 101. And in the track change document, you'd find that in page 135 through 143, local application.
Do we have anything on the local needs assessment?
Local application.
Sorry, local application. Kept seeing CLNA.
I know.
I was processing it through my head as I'm looking at local application.
A new acronym you have to learn.
Yes.
96, are we there?
Yes.
Okay,
Let's go
just a compliment on page 96. Initially, California intends to incorporate the CLNA with its Perkins local application and to augment the LCAP template. I think that sets the direction that this committee had wanted you to do. So thank you very much for doing that.
Anything else on the local application section?
No? All right. Now we can look at local needs assessment, page 101 or page 143.
And in that section, we just referred to the previous section because it was.
So I guess if you had no comments on the previous section, you wouldn't
Yeah,
on
let's
that
hope
section.
it would follow.
I think. All right. So should we move on then to size, scope, and quality, pages 102 through 104? And if you're looking at track changes, that's 143 through 149.
All right. Any comments on size, scope, and quality? Vice Chair Sun? Okay. Anything else? How about Member Salazar? Anything on size, scope, and quality?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
All right. That will move us on then to section 3, meeting the needs of special populations. And the first section in section.
I might take a break.
Anything on special populations?
So just to give you just a background, we addressed some of the comments we talked about, and I mentioned this earlier. We talked about the guided pathways. We talked about not being a bar. I jumped ahead in my presentation, so I'm repeating this again for you. And I identified why inclusion of stakeholder comments were relevant, and we needed to have continued conversation.
All right. So under 3A, program strategies, equal access, page 105 through 109, and track change document would be pages 149 through 159.
Are we going to go back? That's okay. Let's go back.
I'm so sorry. My eyes skip back and forth on some of these. So just going back to section, and I believe it's it may be 103.
Size, scope, and quality?
Yes. Size of CTE programs. I'm trying to find it.
Page 102 through 104?
Yes. Yes. So the right above where it says size of local CTE programs, where it has have adequate facilities, appropriate equipment,
What,
properly.
excuse me, what page?
Page 102.
102. I'm
Thank
so
you.
sorry.
Last
Thank you.
bullet.
Yeah, so have adequate facilities, appropriate equipment, properly credentialed staff to meet the requirements. For properly credentialed, because we're still, that conversation about credentialing, could we say properly prepared staff or appropriately prepared staff or properly prepared staff? Does anyone have any issues with that? Oh, for both post-secondary and?
Yeah, yes. I think if this piece is speaking to both, I know on the K-12 side it's credentialed, and then I think, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's minimal, or they've met minimum qualifications on the
Yeah.
side of the community college. I just want to make sure that we have the right terminology here. So.
To meet requirements of post.
Agreement with the recommendation because our faculty are not credentialed.
Yeah, okay, that's right. So appropriately qualified staff or prepared staff, something along those lines. Okay, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
One other comment I would make here is that in the addendum, we had a description of the monitoring process. And in that's one of the things we check when we go out to the LEAs to check on the credentialing. And we have that in the local application plan that has a matrix that looks at least on the secondary side, it's CTE teacher qualifications.
Yeah, I think you're going to hear some stakeholder feedback on that particular issue. It's just trying to run programs and then not being able to find appropriate staff and all that. So I think it's one of those that may box them in a little bit. So I think you're going to get some conversations around that, which is why I wanted to kind of use a little bit of a more general term rather than credentialed.
I agree, Member Son, because Russ and I were at a meeting Thursday and Friday, and when we presented an overview of the state plan, the majority of the discussion was on teacher credentialing.
Okay, so going back to the section on meeting the needs of special populations, I think it's important in the opening of this section to reference back. In the earlier section, you already said it's the intent that the Perkins 5 plan would be an addendum or a part of the LCAP. It's important to explicitly state in the opening of this section that the reason why the state is making this decision is because the LCAPs that each LEA develops is the state's overarching plan for supporting special populations as a priority that is unique to each local LEA. I think it's important to make that assertion. That way, when you call out just the attention you're paying to special education and the attention that you're paying to English learners, that's not the only special population. You are saying that because districts are charged to do this work and the Perkins plan will be an addendum to that existing local plan, this is part of our overall plan for addressing this requirement. I think that there's an important sentence that needs to be inserted first, or an important expository paragraph inserted first.
Right.
Does that make sense, Jenny?
I think we need to look at that more closely.
Yeah.
And it's certainly something that we need to do.
Yeah, because so here's the thing. I know everyone in this room read fairy tales when they were children, and my favorite fairy tale is always Sleeping Beauty, because somebody gets left off of this list. And so when you look at this list, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I lost count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 specific student populations that are called out in Perkins 5. And in your narrative, in responding to the question, you specifically call out students with special needs and students who are English learners. So that's 2 of all of the groups that are actually listed here. And so as a proxy for explaining how all of these student groups are paid attention to, we need to make sure we call out the LCAP, because that is a responsibility for school districts to address and pay attention to the needs of other students that are called out in Perkins 5. So I know that the reference to the SELPAs and the English learners is called out as an exemplar. And even with the English learners, to state in our dashboard, we have a specific English learner progress indicator that is under development. And for the first time this year, we'll be reporting both status and growth to districts. Because we have those things being called out, we didn't completely answer the prompt if we don't state how the rest of the work is being undertaken.
Great.
Any other comments on meeting the needs of special populations in regards to equal access? Might I just make a request? Down at the bottom of page 105 and 106 of the clean copy, can we bring the rest of the footnote from 106 over to 105 so that it doesn't cut off?
All right. Should we move on?
Okay.
So let's look at non-discrimination, page 109 through 110. And in track change document, that would be pages 159 through 160.
Do we have any comments on the non-discrimination? Any comments from Los Angeles on this section?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay. Can we look at special populations performance levels on page 110 through 113? And track change document, that would be pages 161 through 164.
I appreciate that in this section we spent a good amount of time summarizing the input that we got from our various stakeholder base. Wait, I apologize. I may have jumped ahead. I'm going to hold off. I think my comments are relative to the next section.
Okay, we're looking at pages 110 through 113.
Oh, no, I'm right. It is the right section.
Okay.
Where we obviously are summarizing some of the input that we received, but are we committing to any actionable steps other than partnering with community-based organizations and other partners to address some of these challenges? And do we need to, I guess is the question.
I don't think we are committing to these. I think it was a way of expounding, in some sense, what the field is thinking about this particular topic, and it may be something we would have to take in consideration both at the state level and at the local level of how they might think about spending their funds in this particular area.
And I think that's what I was trying to draw for. If I'm delighted that this has been called out and that we're reflecting on some good thinking and issues that have emerged and percolated that would be helpful, even if we commit to continuing the conversation or looking for ways to address these challenges or support the field and being able to address these challenges, I think would go further.
Mm-hmm. Member Rucker.
Okay, so I appreciate the summary of information you received from stakeholders. I think that was a great idea. But this would be an opportunity to refer from goals and plans that were established and adopted to implement requirements under the ESSA state plan, as well as what was intended with the architecture of the California dashboard. So, for example, in the paragraph that begins, stakeholders recommended training for educators and spoke to the need to attract and retain teachers. That's the Title II section of the ESSA state plan. There's 23 different approved activities that LEAs will be able to use their funding to support and attract and retain teachers. We also have a very explicit example from Visalia Unified and Tulare County about the funding the multi-million-dollar funding that they have received for residency programs. That residency program is focused on general education teachers, but not CTE teachers, but that could be a model for the kind of work that could be undertaken here as an option for local associations, local districts using their LEA funds in Title II. When you get to the next paragraph where it talks about emphasizing issues of equity and professional learning, this is about those communities of practice that are happening all over. There was a recent article that was published, and I know you all received in the building, in the California Educator, about the ways of the communities of practice that exist on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and how teachers are learning to work together and creating their own communities of practice. But also the CTC and other universities are talking about and exploring this idea of micro-credentials and ways of building that into the professional learning activities for teachers. This would be the appropriate place to talk about that work that California is already undertaking. So with each of these successive paragraphs where we have perspectives from stakeholders, there's an opportunity to take credit for the work that we're doing. And again, going back to that pin on accountability, since the focus is to make sure we're designing programs to enable individuals in special populations to meet or exceed state-determined levels of performance. Remember, our dashboard not only reports the general performance of all students in the district and at the school side level, it disaggregates performance of those significant student subgroups so that districts can understand and see with some immediacy who their urgent priorities are, and to track over time the change in performance of those students. This might be a good opportunity to, again, revisit the explanation about our state's accountability system and how that points to and informs the decisions that districts can make about these students. That's a huge amendment that I'm just explaining. Again, I think you're going to get feedback from stakeholders during the public comment period that will allow you to work on doing that. But there's a lot of work the state has already implemented over the past 6 years with the implementation of the LCAP that actually addresses this very well. So I think the advantage you will have after the public comment period is stakeholders are going to point that out for you, and you can just go ahead and craft that amendment in. So I'm not making the recommendation for the amendment for you to do it before you send it out for public comment. I think there will be stakeholders who will also make that same point, and you'll have a chance to respond to that and revise this section to add that. So that's, again, I'm foreshadowing some of the comments that I want to make about accountability that will actually help us in this section.
Right.
Thank you, Member Rucker. Are there any other comments on this section? How about anything from Los Angeles?
No, ma'am, not on this section.
No?
Nothing
All
on
right.
this section.
So actually, page 113 has two sections, appropriate accommodations and work-based learning opportunities. We might look at both of those at the same time since it's only one page.
And they both reference back to previous sections.
Correct, yeah. So we're good there?
I would say we are. Let's check to make sure. Yes, seems like. Well, I would say it is now 12:45, and it would be probably a good time. We've been at this for 2 hours, made significant progress to the point of being 2/3, if not 3/4, through the narrative of the document, excluding the appendices. I think it would be appropriate for us to take a short break for lunch, to invite everyone to join us. We have more than enough to share, and reconvene shortly. I'm going to say probably at the top of the hour or within 5 or 10 minutes of the 1 o'clock hour. I would say we are in recess for lunch, and we will resume about 1 o'clock.
All right, thank you.
Well, it looks like it's coming up on almost 1:20, which is slightly a little later than the 1 o'clock hour that we were in recess to. So we will reconvene. I'll call it 1:19, and we will go back. I believe we are now on section 4, preparing teachers and faculty.
Correct.
Very good.
So in that section, we're talking about preparing teachers and faculty, and the focus is on teacher recruitment and retention. From the discussion on November 7th with you, we included language about the government pension offset issue, and we have language that is brought forward to the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, CTC, in the addendum item that's with, so just what, these are recommendations, and I think there's more continued work that needs to be done there.
All right. So I think we're ready to talk about section 4, preparing teachers and faculty. Part A is teacher recruitment and retention. That can be found on page 114 through 118. And if you're following the track change document, that's 166 through 170. So we're open to comments. Did we get the people from LA back?
It doesn't look like it. I was told that Member Salazar was going to need to excuse herself at 1:15. I don't believe that she will be back, and it looks currently as though David Rattray will be popping in and out, coming back and forth into the meeting room. Do we have anything on this section? Okay.
Okay.
Forward.
Thank you. Let's.
Vice Chair Sun.
Okay. Is this section referring to K-12 or both K-12 and post-secondary?
This is primarily referring to K-12, although, so it is referring to K-12, I should say that.
It is, okay.
Well, there is some explanation on page 115, second paragraph about community college. And on page 116, in the third
Community
paragraph.
college CD must mean, okay, yep.
Were there any other questions on this section?
Well, I would say some of the challenges are sort of unique, not unique to one side or the other. It's probably true to both sides in terms of teacher preparation and retention.
Member Rucker?
I do want to draw attention. The legislature has been paying particular attention to the problems, or at least some of the issues incrementally, of staffing, community college, career tech programs. For example, I know in this last legislative session that just ended, the legislature extended an exemption concerning staffing for nursing programs to allow fully licensed nurses who are already working in those programs the exemption of being able to continue. So maybe take a look at, and again, this is something you can, I'm sure you're going to get some feedback from stakeholders, but this is something you can do in the revision, is talk about some of the help that's been provided for targeted exemptions on career technical staffing, career technical programs like in the allied health field, particularly like nursing programs that were addressed with some exemptions by the legislature that the governor signed into law. That might be something worth commenting on and adding in this section because it was helpful.
Thank you, Member Rucker. Anything further on this section?
Okay, we're going to move on to fiscal responsibility.
So in this section, we talked about the criteria for approving funds. So we had talked about the distribution of funds earlier, and we just brought it back here too as well. We talked about how these funds were going to be used in 3 areas: academic achievement, skill attainment, and local and economic education needs, and how those funds, then we talked about particularly the distinction between individual recipients and recipients on a consortia basis and what that implied. Then we talked about the allocation criteria, which is prescriptive. It's based on the U.S. Department of Education guidelines, and the allocation criteria for post-secondary LEAs, which primarily is based on Pell recipients in CTE. We talked about the year-to-year adjustments, and on the secondary allocation formula, there is no waiver, but on the post-secondary allocation, there's a waiver, and that is used, and that's an appendix. The criteria for awarding reserve funds to LEAs and how that is typically under Perkins 4, we have returned those back to the field on the secondary side, but on the post-secondary side, some of it is kept at the Chancellor's office for a different kind of distribution. And this is one of the discussions we have to have as we move forward under Perkins 5. The state maintenance of effort hasn't changed very much for the last couple of years because there have been no new state CTE programs that have come online. But as I cautioned last time, we may be reporting too much because, and it may be okay now, but if you do move into a recession and those programs are taken by, we are still accountable to that maintenance of effort. So I think that's a discussion we need to have sooner rather than later about how that maintenance of effort is actually going to be calculated, because we do have programs in here that they're all CT, but maybe there are some that are much more important in the Perkins arena than the others. So I'm just putting that out as a thought in some sense. Member Rucker.
Well, I do know that, and I did go back and read the language on maintenance of effort that was written in Perkins, and for some reason, Congress in its wisdom didn't choose to align the language concerning maintenance of effort in this statute with what they did in revising some of the more stringent requirements for maintenance of effort under ESSA. So I think it might be worth, as you're right, as we approach a possible recession, not just to look at what the requirements are, but what the differences may be or how it may impact what is actually reported for the program. That's not something that's going to inform this plan, and I agree with you. Maybe for the purposes of this plan, we over-reported, but I think the over-reporting is going to be our saving grace if we do have to make some revisions, because it will be very transparent the reasons why those revisions became necessary. So I actually want to thank you. This tends to be, for me, the most difficult section to read because it tends to be highly technical and very uninteresting. But you actually made it very clear, very explicit, and it actually conforms to an explanation about why the rest of the narrative in the plan, specifically the split between local control and the statewide authority, why that actually makes sense for why we're operating in that way. So I really want to give my kudos to you for how this section was laid out.
All right, so we want to have a discussion on fiscal responsibility, criteria and process for approving funds for eligible recipients. And Section A, academic achievement, that's on page 118 in your document and 171 in track change document.
Any comments on letter A? I think we're good on A.
Okay, and then let's move to page 119, which is skill attainment. And that's on the track change document 171 through 172. Page 119 in your document.
Anything for section B on skill attainment? No? Okay.
All right. And local economic and education needs. This in your document is on page 119 through 120. And it can be found in the track change document on 172, 173.
Anything on section C?
No? Okay. That moves us to the next section, number 2, on distribution of funds. Distribution of funds, secondary, post-secondary, and adult, page 121. In the track change document, page 173 through 174.
Any comments on the distribution, secondary, post-secondary, and adult? Nothing on this section?
Okay. Moving on to consortia funding, 122 through 123, and track change document 174 through 175.
I do want to remind the members that California is one of the states that allows for a waiver to this rule if local LEAs choose to apply that and they use this criteria. They're in sparsely populated areas and they don't meet the 15,000 threshold, and they can apply to the state board for a waiver, and that applies both. I mean, the community colleges, it doesn't apply because the threshold is a lot higher, and so they do have consortia there, but I think there are some LEAs that don't meet the 15,000 threshold, and they do apply for waivers. We're maybe in the double digits in terms of those waivers.
Any other comments on section B? No?
Okay. So we're completing that section. We're going on to section 3, allocation criteria for secondary local eligible recipients. And that's on page 123 and on 175 in the track change document. Most of these are short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything on this section?
No? Okay, then let's look at allocation criteria for post-secondary LEAs, pages 123 through 124, or on page 176 of the track change document.
Anything on section 4?
No?
No.
No, good. All right, let's look at page 124, or the remainder of that page anyway, for describing year-to-year adjustments for the allocation criteria. This is all pretty technical, kind of.
As Member Rucker said,
you
could
almost
be difficult to read, but we thank them very much for making it as
And most of this
palatable
is
as
the
possible.
federal act really kind of defines how you have to do this anyway. So it's easy. Okay, nothing there, and then.
Let me just say,
Oh, sure.
one of the things that I want to compliment the state for, we already have some practices for reporting and posting for purposes of transparency I think are important, and I'm really glad that you included the web pages where all this information will be posted and regularly updated. I think that that is very commendable that we had that information to provide.
Thank you. All right. Do we want to look at application for a waiver to the secondary allocation formula? There's really none, so. If you request a waiver for either the secondary or post-secondary, you have to propose an alternative formula. That's one criteria. But the other criteria is you have to prove that alternative formula provides a more equitable distribution of the funds. So there is providing that as well. And for instance, that's why we do a waiver for post-secondary, because the feds require it to be distributed on Pell Grant. And if you looked at that, our adult schools would be out of the loop for Perkins funds, so that's not equitable. And in fact, some community colleges have a higher percentage of Pell Grant than others, and it would be a disproportionate share as well. So looking at the number of economically disadvantaged adults they're serving, in our mind, was a more equitable distribution. And we were able to convince the feds that that's true.
And this continues from Perkins 4, right? It doesn't change.
Yeah, we've had that waiver for a while. Okay, so do we want to look pages 125 through 128? That's the actual waiver itself on post-secondary. And if you look at track changes, it's 178 through 181.
Anything on this section?
No? All right. We want to look at state maintenance of effort, paid. Sure.
There is one other, I was wondering in this list of assistance programs or participating in these programs, I remember there was an update done on Chafee grants that expanded the age of eligibility for community college students who were receiving that. Is that something that is related, that can be related to identifying participants or who are identifying students? Is that an award or a grant that can be also added to this list?
I don't know. You know.
It's on page 126 in the clean document where it lists Promise Grant, Pell Grant, CalWORKS, WIOA, Supplementary Social Security Income. The Chafee Award, that's a state program, but I'm just wondering if, because the participants have the same profile as students who receive some of these grants, if that can't also be included in this list or be considered.
Yeah.
We will look at that
Yeah.
and see how
And again,
it
it's
aligns
not
with that
necessary
section.
to fix it before it goes out for public comment, but if that is an award that, because the students meet the similar profile, just for purposes of being as expansive or inclusive as possible,
Right.
if it can be considered, then please add it.
Yeah. We'd like to add, I think, any criteria that designates a person as economically disadvantaged. So we
Yes.
can count that person. Okay?
Anything else on this section?
No? Okay, do we want to look at
this
state?
David Rattray
Oh.
rejoined.
All right. Welcome back, David.
Thank you. And I agree with the Chafee comment too, by the way. I love to make sure we don't forget our foster youth. So thank you, Patricia.
All right, do we want to look at state maintenance of effort, pages 128 through 129? And then on the track changes document, it's 181 through 182. I might just add here that I think the most significant change for maintenance of effort between Perkins 4 and Perkins 5 is under Perkins 4, if you didn't maintain your effort, you lost the whole grant.
Oh.
Under Perkins 5, if your maintenance of effort decreases by 10%, you lose 10% of your funding. So that was a huge change between Perkins 4 and Perkins 5 that often goes unnoticed. But it is a big change.
A major change.
Do we have any comments in this section on maintenance of effort? How about any comments from Los Angeles?
None here.
Okay.
All right. So shall we move forward then to our section D, accountability for results?
I do believe so.
No, we will have lots of comments here, but let me just set the stage. As we have to identify one indicator of program quality. That's a typo there. We should take that out. The SDPL's baseline and targets, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that. The procedure for arriving at these state-determined performance levels, the SDPL's baselines and targets. I'll explain a public comment process as we have this discussion, and an explanation of how these measures align to the SDPL alignment to other measures, particularly on the secondary side. It's aligned to the ESSA measures, and on the post-secondary side, it's aligned to their, I think, their accountability measures, and I think that's mentioned in here. We have a public comment process and how we address disparities and gaps in performance. We also provided a context for Perkins accountability measures by describing the California accountability model. We made connections to accountability projections for ESSA, and maybe, as earlier discussion indicated, we may have to do some more, and describe more fully how the SDPLs were arrived at.
All right. So we're looking at identifying and including one indicator of program quality, pages 130 through 132 in your clean document. And then track changes document, it's 183 through 191.
Have any comments on this section? Member Rawlings.
I just want to make sure at the very first line of page 131, you cut the verbiage there. California is fortunate to have an already developed the CCI. I want to make sure you catch that.
Yep.
Any other comments on this section number 1? Member Rucker.
Okay, so first of all, I appreciate the work that you did to talk about what the data that's collected in CalPads and the work that's being done with the development of the CCI. I think that between the CCI and CalPads, one thing that probably should be made clear, especially with regard to the conversation on CalPads, California recognizes that there are some deficiencies in the way data is collected and captured about K-12 students in CalPads that the state still currently has under study. I think it's important to state that because CalPads is not perfect, and there are other data systems that do exist in the community college system that collect more granular data that's of a different quality than what we currently can capture in CalPads. So I think it's important to say that it is a data system that we are continuing to refine and improve based on our understanding of the current capability for what it can report and how it can operate to report. I think it's also important to differentiate between the two data points that you've identified. At the bottom of page 131, the 1 semester or 2 quarters of college credit with a C or better. And then at the top of page 132, the student who completes at least 300 hours. There's a difference in the time, I'm going to say time frame, between when one data point can be collected relatively sooner than the other data point. I think it's important to differentiate which is the lagging indicator and which is the indicator that can be collected with some immediacy so that it would be more up to date for data reporting purposes. I think also the idea about alignment on accountability, that there is a difference between what those two data points mean for a K-12 program for purposes of accountability and what those data points mean for community college. So I think it would be important to also identify, as it relates to the CCI, there is a need to explain that we have long-term and interim goals that the K-12 programs are also accountable for. I think it would be important to explain that because it doesn't mean the same thing for accountability purposes for a K-12 program as it would for a community college program because of those long-term and interim goals. I hope that makes sense.
That makes sense, but I just want to highlight the fact that for the first time in Perkins, the law on the secondary side defines a concentrator.
Yes.
But there's a lot of wiggle room in that definition, and states is so based on individual data systems within the state, they are coming up with a definition that meets the legislation, but also it can be collected within those data systems, and that was the intent behind this.
Yes, I understand that.
On the community college side, nothing has changed from Perkins 4 to Perkins 5. It's really the same way of collecting a concentrator information in that, and that's why we didn't have very much in there, because it's really the same type of collection. It's really they have fewer indicators to report on the post-secondary side.
Yes, I understand that, and our concern is particularly because the CCI is a reporting element in the dashboard. There are these long-term goals for gains and growth over time or improvement in what's being reported. So while the CCI is actually reported at the LEA or school level. It's not an individual student report. Each of these data points means something with particularity as it's reported in the CCI. And I just think a sentence or two needs to be added to explain why that becomes important for an additional accountability element for those K-12 programs that's not contemplated by how it would be reported in this plan. So we're elevating a couple of data points out of the CCI that have some very significant concerns for K-12 schools. So we need to let them know that in elevating these points, they don't become more important than the balance of what is in the CCI itself. Does that make sense?
What I'm struggling a little bit with is this section is it trying to address what we collectively between the community college and K-12 trying to what our collective goal is and then how we're going to measure if we're meeting those goals. And again, it's just one of these where I feel like we haven't had enough information, data, and conversation around. So it feels like we put some things together, but I don't know if it really addresses the question here, and I don't know if we're feeling satisfied it's addressing the question. So I appreciate your comments, Member Rucker, around the CCI and being and articulating in a way that it doesn't offset the balance of what the entire CCI indicator is. But I'm not quite sure if that's the right. It's a measure, but I don't know if that's the right one when we're talking about how we're, for purposes of this, the Perkins funding and moving our CTE programs forward.
Well, maybe let's see what the stakeholders come, because again, as it relates to our accountability system, we have, over the time that the board worked on developing the CCI and I'm sorry, and even creating the dashboard itself, we heard from a lot of perspectives about the multiple facets that were finally framing the dashboard. So it is possible that the stakeholders may actually give us better ideas and a better way to explain or frame this particular decision point that could be helpful to in doing a revision. So the comments I'm making, I'm not asking you to revise them in before you post it. I'm just hoping someone will hear that I'm asking this question and think about it in the same way I'm asking somebody to give me a synonym for humility that begins with the letter P. I'm asking, think about this and figure, are there some other ways we could explain this to clarify the intent of the pathway we're choosing to go through on this accountability? And they may be able to come back with something for us.
Member Rucker, one of the things that we are planning to do, because because of time, we haven't got to it, is to sort of simultaneously have this out for public comment, if you approve, but also talk to, we have to set up an accountability group to look at that, and those are the things that we will have, and we'll have that in the month of either in December or have that conversation, and this essentially bring those two, both the public comment as well as their comments in terms, because as you said, it would be similar, like you were suggesting earlier, those accountability stakeholder comments could be rolled into the public comments that we have, and then we can adjust the text in the document.
Yeah, so I know that my state board staff are going to chastise me later on for making this request. So since I heard you say that you're going to have this internal work group or discussion group, I would just like to be a fly on the wall. I don't have to be a participant, but I really would like to be a fly on the wall to hear that conversation, because I think that will help me also to ossify my ideas about where we're trying to go with this as well.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about, I should clarify. I have a group that I'm working with in basically the three data, EDMD, TSD, and AMARD, all three, sorry for the acronyms, but basically working with them to have continuing conversation about Perkins accountability. In fact, we're meeting tomorrow internally to continue the conversation, but the stakeholder group is external, and I think you'd be most welcome to join that, and we'll let you know that.
Thank you very much.
Again, just I appreciate that you put in the state accountability. I just don't think our state accountability system right now is nuanced enough to get at what we want to look at for Perkins specifically.
I mean, a case in point is the college credit course, is that it's only 1 year, as I was mentioning earlier. We need a couple of years to see some patterns in that. And the reason for choosing that, as opposed to work-based learning or post-secondary credits, is internal to CDE, and it allows us to continue the discussion, whereas the other ones, like post-secondary awards, for instance, or industry-based credentials, we need to talk to external individuals, and that takes more time in some sense.
Well, then I would recommend I think probably then what would address the concerns I'm trying to articulate, and I recognize I'm not really doing a good job, in much the same way that for our relationship with schools as a state education agency, we're focused on continuous improvement. Maybe for this section, we need to talk about our evolving accountability system and use the term of art continuous refinement, so that over time, with the data that's being asked for, the data will tell us more as we get better, not only at collecting it, but understanding what it means. So if we can figure out, and again, not for within a week before you send this out for public comment, but if we can figure out a way when this is refined in the draft after public comment to talk about this idea of an accountability system focused on continuous refinement of the data, I think that would help to address some of the things I'm trying to get at in this point.
And another piece that we've been working on here was the matrix of metrics, and we've been having this conversation around the matrix of metrics. It's not really mentioned in here that we've been doing some of this work to try to look at what data we have there and have the conversation together around this committee to see where we can find alignment, or where we could collect data at K-12 and then do the handoff to community college. So it's not addressed here. It doesn't need to be before it goes out to public, but I think that is something that we should probably put in there.
Vice Chair Sun, actually on page 136 in a footnote, I do refer to the matrix of metrics. So I do refer to that.
I noticed in this section that we're referring to a table, section 5B. I did indeed find a table on section 5, just not the B. Is there something?
That's at the end of the document.
It's at the end of the document.
The projections that we're talking about. It's at the end of the document.
I don't think there is.
So
it's page 150.
Do we have a page number?
What page?
150.
Okay, and where's the B?
Not labeled.
It's just not labeled. Yeah.
Okay. So what should be labeled as B would be
Table 5, probably.
all of table 5 or only a portion of table 5?
It's point 149 and 150.
Okay. So that whole thing would be labeled as 5, Roman numeral 5, capital B?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, because there's some editing that needs to be done with the decisions, so it's aligned to what the board decided. Yeah.
So since it's mentioned in this section,
Should we go to the
table 5?
Yeah.
Are you okay with doing that, or would you rather us go to that in sequential order?
To table, you want to look at the
So we
table?
want to
Yeah.
jump ahead in the order is what we're asking.
Yes, I have that in front of me.
Okay.
Or we could go through the rest. It's not too much more, but it's up to you.
I think it would be appropriate, since it's referenced extensively in this section, that now would be a good time to talk about Roman numeral 5 state determined performance levels.
Right, so did you want to talk a little bit about how these were determined first before we have the conversation around that, or, yeah?
As I said, and as I explained in the document, the only time the sort of data that I had was from the old Perkins accountability system that 2008 to 2015, and that was at district level data. So I used that data to essentially project forward and to use that data to come up with these numbers and then use a moving averages technique to essentially come up with a figure that is consistent with performance, previous performance. But given last time's discussion, I went back and compared those numbers with more recent performance for all students. And I looked at that, and it falls within the ballpark. So I looked at high school graduation rate, for example, in 2018 is around 84%. So that's the number for high school for all students. Keep in mind that this calculation is based on a denominator that is different from all students. And the likelihood of these students performing at a slightly higher rate is there because they've committed themselves to an industry path and therefore would move forward. And that's why this is slightly higher than what the overall high school graduation rate. I also looked at the ELA performance, and I looked at math performance, and I looked at two groups because it's broken down by different groups, socioeconomically disadvantaged, because that's the population I think that this legislation targets mostly, but I also have total, and the number that I've chosen falls in between. So I have to say that it's not the best scientific way of doing this, but it is what I had.
And you did, and I really commend you for making that effort to do that. And I think it's more for this committee, it's the policy conversation discussion. While what you've done here is base these on fairly real numbers, as best calculation guess moving forward and projecting for performance of CTE concentrators. And so what we're saying is that we have a vision statement earlier on that says all students, all California students will have access to CTE programs. And that's our big audacious goal that in the future. So the question then for us is, should we then really be setting the target as we would for all students in California, not just CTE concentrators? Do we adjust down or up because of CTE concentrators, or do we make it consistent across the board? And that's something that I would like to hear from you. I have some thoughts. I note some of the arguments, keeping it more for concentrators, and maybe you can explain a little bit more if we had to adjust what that would mean from these numbers. But I think that's a fundamental policy question we need to answer, and before we can move forward.
As I said last time, we do not have to report these numbers till December of 2021. And so we can continue to have conversations. And even after we submit in April 15th, we have numbers, let's say, that align better to ESSER or to the CCI or anything. We can go back and let them know that we've adjusted these SDPLs, and these are our new projections that we have the reason you see two in the same year is because the law actually permits you to do that. It permits you to sort of keep those projections at the same level for 2 years in a row. But ultimately, the catch here is that if your performance is higher, then you have to adjust upwards in the third and fourth years. If your performance is lower but still is above the targets, you probably keep the targets where they are. The other issue that we have to be careful about is that if we do not meet the targets within 90%, it kicks in a whole process by which both at the LEA level as well as at our level, in terms of bringing back the stakeholder group, revising all of this, coming up with a plan of action, and making sure that we come up with more realistic projection numbers that the state can meet in the future. So that really is something. So maybe that's why I was a little more cautious in the way I was choosing these numbers.
Member Rucker.
Okay, so let me ask let me do a little probing with you on what's actually being shown here in this chart, because I want to make sure we're having a conversation about the same kind of information. So the definition of your four-year graduation rate, is that different from the definition of the four-year graduation rate in ESSA?
Not really, except the denominator is the concentrator.
Okay, so for the graduation rate in ESSA, the denominator is all students. And so for the four-year graduation rate here, the denominator is a subgroup of just the CTE concentrator.
Correct.
So let me just ask this question. What is the current capacity of CalPads to help you differentiate and capture those students who meet the definition of concentrator?
Right now, we have actually had discussions with CalPads, and they can actually collect that information.
Yes.
So we will be reporting performance based on those concentrators.
Okay, so and then on the extended graduation rate, what is there's a definition for the extended graduation rate in ESSA, and again, is the difference only between all students and CTE concentrators?
That is correct. In all of these measures, it's really the denominator that is changing, and we're trying to stay in line with particularly with except for the non-tracked measure, which is uniquely Perkins. Rest of them align with the CDE measures as we both in terms of like academic proficiency in mathematics, in English language. Science is yet, we have to collect science, but that won't come till next January, and we'll only have 1 year for that. So it has the same issue around the college credit courses. But to answer your question, it really does fit within the CalPads data dashboard, data quest information.
And the same thing is true about the collection of information about the 4 program quality indicators.
That is correct.
All right, so let me suggest that maybe there are actually 2 different decision points or 2 different conversations that have to happen here. First of all, it's the responsibility of the state education agency to set performance goals for all students as well as for student subgroups. And so as it relates to CTE concentrators, that's a conversation the state board has never been tasked to do. And this is something that's relatively new. The question is it the responsibility of the board to do, the state board to do that, or is it the responsibility of this panel to do that? Because in either way, what would happen if we approve this report for public comment, are we also approving these recommended points? So I think that's the first question we need to think about. What is that? What does approving this draft mean as it relates to the data points that are suggested here? The second thing would be when we looked at setting those performance targets, both the intermediate and the long-term performance targets, the technical design team took a lot of time to look at different ways to cut that information and the impact of schools that are currently below or currently exceeding the targets that are set here. Do you have any information about the programs for these CTE concentrators about how many schools or LEAs are currently at, below, or exceeding these targets and how they are on track? Do you have that kind of information?
I can compare what they did with the old data, but I think we have less information in CalPads right now.
Okay.
And so we would have, probably a year from now, we would have 17, 18, 19, I would say, so we could at least have some baseline and that's why if we needed to change the baseline, we can go back and change.
Okay. So that's the first part of this conversation. I think the second piece is in the narrative section that we jumped from, I think that it does need to be revised to explain what this chart is actually attempting to analyze and explain and what these data points are supposed to mean, because that, based on what the conversation we just had, what is written in this draft is not quite what this table is reporting or intended to report. Does that make sense? Yeah, based on the questions I asked you about who's being reported about, how the data is being developed, and the fact that we currently do not have an ability to understand or look at the status of our schools, where they are based on these points, we really can't say in the accountability section about what our plans are for providing support for these schools if we don't actually know who they are. So I think that the narrative section that we jumped from, and again, don't try to do this in the week before it goes out. I think there will be enough stakeholders who are going to jump on and see the same concerns that we're raising here. We'll get a chance to respond back and do some revision. But I want your team to think about, based on what you just explained, this table is trying to report and how you crafted these goals. There needs to be a closer alignment between what the narrative said these goals are about and how we're going to support schools to meet these goals, and also what we understand about the current state of programs based on these goals, because that's the part that then is not being answered by the question.
Member Rucker, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to come to you and ask your permission to do that and come back to you at the end of January and include all that information within that. So.
Yeah, because the 5x5 grid that we develop in our accountability model is for schools. It's to measure how schools are doing overall, and then it's broken up by subgroups, as you know, and so you can see where subgroups are performing on certain measures. It's the CTE concentrator is not a public subgroup, but we're able to take that data in, and that's how you come up with these numbers. I understand the practical implications of not meeting targets that we've established here and what it might mean for us as a state and for the individual LEAs to have to reconvene groups and talk about why we're not meeting the targets. At the same time, I am concerned the message that we send when we establish a different target, whether it's up or down, from what we've established for all students in the state. Because if we're saying that CTE concentrators baseline level is below, let's say what the statewide it is, what does that say about the students who are CTE concentrators? Are we saying that they're not good enough, or shouldn't be, or they're not performing well enough? And I think we should hit for all of our subgroups to hit the target that we want for all students. So I'm kind of torn. I'm conflicted about what to do in this, and I am concerned, as Member Rucker says, that if we put these out there for public comment, these numbers, are we saying this is okay, this is the policy direction we're going? And I don't know that we're ready to do that part
because
yet.
Our intent is not to lower standards. If your intent in setting these numbers is to set a baseline based on the status in the field right now, the narrative doesn't say that. But the difference between setting targets and establishing these standards, targets should be something we have to reach for, not just something that reflects where the field is at this exact moment. And if these targets are lower than the academic performance standards, are we creating then what we have worked hard to fight against, which is a two-tier, not only expectation system, but level of expectation for performance? That's the message that's tacitly written here, and that's not our intent. So that's why I'm saying we need to be careful what it means to adopt this draft, and we need to go back and relook at what the narrative is trying to explain, because with all the conversation we've had here, nothing that we've talked about here about what the intent is actually explained in the narrative. And I think that that's probably going to confuse the field a great deal. And I'm actually looking forward to somebody saying, have you lost your mind? And so that's an opportunity for us to fix it. But I would rather know that we're not going to wait for somebody to ask us, have we lost our mind, that we know we need to work on this anyway.
And that's why I went back to the vision. And we didn't pause on the actual vision statement there because there wasn't a lot of comments on it. But I did say in the last meeting, you all know we're all saying all students. It's a great goal to go for. If we're saying all students, and at the very beginning of this application, we outlined our vision that all students will have access to quality CTE programs, then if we're saying then as a result, these are the performance levels they should be performing in. And so if we were to lower it, I don't know that I think it's counter to the vision as well. So I'm not sure where we want to go. So you had said that we don't actually need to establish this until December of 2021?
Well, we don't have to report performance measures.
We don't have to
We have to establish something.
But we have to
No,
establish.
we have to have this in the plan, but it can be changed anytime since that. So if you come up with improved data, we can change that. Or if you come up with, if stakeholders come back and say you have to have the ESSA targets, then we put that in, and you know, and so that we have some leeway in this area. I think this thing was, given the time and given that we're working against time, I was trying to come with an expeditious way of filling this table, because from the meeting I went in Baltimore about 10 days ago, they said you cannot leave this table blank. It is a violation. The legal counsel would get into this in some sense. So that's something that I heard from them. So whether they were trying to sort of use a stick, I do not know. But I think we are better off having some numbers in there and coming back and adjusting them with more information as we even as early as next summer, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I would frankly be more comfortable if we went out with the ESSA targets rather than something different, because we know that our state board has established the ESSA targets, and if we need to adjust differently as time period in the next year or so, we can do that as we get more data. But I would rather do something that we've had extensive conversation, and the technical design team, they've all had a look at it, and go with that first. And my other question is, my understanding is that for the community college indicators, that the community college is going for aspirational, for what they've established in their overarching plan. Is that right? Or am I
have a lot of questioning on that same thing. So,
yeah. So I'm going to let you guys have your conversation. But anyway, I think that's where I would rather it start with the ESSA targets. And
I could, for the purposes of this draft, for the purpose of what we would initially submit to the feds for this plan, I also agree. I would rather see us use what's already been established by the state education agency as our long-term and interim targets in each of these areas, because they've already been deeply analyzed and deeply vetted by stakeholders in a very public way, to use those targets and those numbers. And as we get toward reporting, if we need to make adjustments based on a decision to change from looking at reporting for all students, as is our aspiration that was stated in the plan, beginning on page 1 of the plan, to focusing just on what we report on concentrators, to make that adjustment when the data system allows us to have that level of refinement.
Do we happen to know the answer to the query that was just enumerated regarding where the figures came from on the post-secondary side?
The post-secondary one came from previous.
So, Jeff, would you like to address it?
I can respond to the question.
Thank you.
The data came from our JC Mobetta, Jean-Claude, who's our data specialist, and he used the same methodology and trend to be able to put these together and work closely with Pradeep on that.
Okay.
One point of comment, the interest of Perkins 5 in these targets are to a specific federal policy, and there are specific numerators and denominators that are defined. And while I appreciate the conversation of all students, and I think we should, in fact, set that into our accountability structure and conversation going forward, it's delimited by the policy itself for these numbers that are targeted here.
And in the area that currently is blank, is that something that we can fill in, or no, we don't have that information currently?
Are you talking on page 149? Is that
Yes.
On page 149, basically, what we are going to choose is 5S2 at the secondary side. So the blank candy is acceptable in the other three. It's 5S2, and the only one number I have there right now is 11.6%. And so I'm trying to wait. Maybe I'll get some more information, but I haven't put that in. I'm just starting to work on that, and that's one of the dilemmas that we have. In some of this data, we don't have a large enough time series to make any judgment about what it looks like in the future.
Okay, so let me go back with, let me pick up this thread to make sure we're getting this right, because this is an important point. Staff have made the point that the mandate on this data analysis, the specific data point relates to what's in the denominator. It's so funny we're talking about this because I have a friend her daughter and I are studying together for the SAT. Guess which one of us are taking the SAT? And we're talking about this denominator and numerator thing, and she's learning about trigonometry, and it's important what's in the denominator. So right now we're talking about what's in this denominator. For members of the state board, the denominator is all students. What I just heard from staff that you clearly articulated and that you are asking us to accept as the insertion point in this conversation is that the denominator must be the CTE concentrators. So as a result, if you use the CTE concentrators as the denominator, the numbers that have been interpolated from our staff's analysis in creating these long-term goals, those numbers are going to be lower because it's a smaller group of students that we're talking about. So I can understand that. You need to explain that in the narrative, because when people see these numbers, stakeholders are only going to see one set of numbers and ask why they're lower without understanding that we're talking about a specific targeted subgroup of students that are currently not captured in our data system, specifically in the dashboard. So I think that needs to be explained. And I think if that is what we're required to do, and that is the recommendation of the staff, rather than for us to say we're going to do our own thing and focus on our own statewide goals that we already have for all students, because that's the goal of our program, we need to make sure that we're clear, even though our aspirational goals is to create a program that all students benefit from, we are held accountable in this program for the students that are ultimately identified as concentrators. So I'm looking at the staff and they're saying I'm on the correct path. All right, so I think that that's where we need to go.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but it's still, and for the baseline level, definitely we'll have to use those numbers that you have. What troubles me still is when we're setting the performance levels and the targets, that while realistic is not, I feel we may be setting a lower standard because we're trying to be realistic. I
think the way to do that is to make the long-term trajectory
higher,
make that higher, so that it moves to the statewide goal for all students.
That's right.
So that in the same way that all student subgroups under our dashboard have a very large and long trajectory to meet a large and long-term target, I think the long-term goal needs to be closer to the statewide goal for all students. So this would be kind of a compromise. We're going to use the trajectory with the appropriate denominator, focusing on all students, on just the CTE concentrator group. But I think we need to hold that subgroup accountable to a similar long-term goal that is similar to the long-term goals for all students in the state. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have to project all the way to 2023, let's make 2023 the long-term goal or the goal for all students, and then you can kind of go in between, and then we can adjust as we get more data.
And so, but 2023 would always stay what the long-term goal is for all students in the state. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and bring everybody up to that goal.
That's right. And I think then that would help with the message that what we're sending out for CTE concentrators is the same that we're sending out for all subgroups, what we aspire all of them to achieve.
Member Sun, I appreciate this point that you're making about all students. I think that's incredibly important. What I would like to also recommend is that we have that discussion in the context of the CTE, the state plan for CTE, and make that the aspiration and goal in the state plan, looking at all students, because the federal application is a subset of the state plan, and so it makes sense to really look at the much bigger picture and with the same trajectory that you're talking about. And it's a very worthwhile discussion that we need to have moving forward with the state plan development for the CTE state plan, if that makes sense.
So I hear what you're saying, but are you saying that we could look for that at the larger state CTE plan, but keep these numbers for this application? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm not suggesting that we keep these numbers. I'm just saying that we need to provide the larger context that these numbers stay are a subset of. And yes.
I understand that, and these will always be a subset. But what I'm trying to do is get our subset to meet the larger state goals, and I think that is the larger state board's policy, and this has to be approved by the larger state board. And so what I'm trying to do is find that balance between the realistic, what we're trying to do for the purposes of this application, but then also as a policy direction where we want to go. And we can be realistic. We talk about continuous improvement. We talk about additional data that need to be collected. So we know we can make adjustments. But this application out there should say something about where we want to go.
So it sounds like what we could do is make a statement about aligning to the state plan of the goal, the aspiration goal of addressing all students and not just the CTE concentrators, and align the trajectory to that. Because I believe it's a conversation that we haven't looked at the particular formulas and how that would look like, because I believe we haven't done that before. This is a new aspiration goal in terms of trying to develop what that trajectory looked like, and we would need to do some formulating essentially, and making sure we have the right formula based on the federal application requirements and their formula. So we have to do some work to align both of them.
Yeah, I understand, but the definition still, at least for K-12, the definition is the same. We have the information. It's just as if we were looking at how our English language learners are doing on the math test or the English language arts test, right? So for K-12, we're able to pull that out. It's the same definition, but we're saying for CTE concentrators should be at least the average of everybody, right? Or higher.
Okay, thank you.
One clarification I should make is both the numerator and the denominator are all CTE students. So the numerators, yeah. Just wanted to make sure that
they're both CTE concentrators.
Yeah, so I understand that what is different here is we're only talking about, for both parts of this calculation, CTE students. And I also understand that that is the reason why this necessarily is smaller, or is there's an inequality here that is that on its face is concerning to us. But the fact is that inequality has to be there, because we're talking about a smaller group of students. But in other words, what I'm saying is, knowing that, that's not what the narrative says. And so that's what I'm trying. That's why early on in the discussion on the draft, I told you I wanted to put a pin in this section, because it's not just the paragraph we jumped from that you're going to have to fix the narrative on. It goes back to that entire section 2 where we created these aspirations for all students. You need to say this plan holds us accountable only for the performance of CTE concentrators. That was the pen I was holding. So that helps you understand why I said I need to put a pin here, because that's when you get, that's the refinement in that section where we talk about our aspirations for the whole state and for all students. You do need to say, but the difference is, for the purposes of this plan, we are only accountable for the performance of CTE students. That needs to be clarified in that earlier section. And for the narrative we jumped from, you need to explain what we're actually reporting, tracking, and monitoring, because that's not clear in that narrative section. And again, I'm not asking you to write that out for the public comment, because there's not enough time to do all of that. But I also think the stakeholders are going to give you some feedback that will help you to refine that part of the narrative. And of course, you're going to hear from us, and we'll be willing to help with that as well. But I think you understand what we're asking for on the clarification, because we really heard two different things, and the connection between what is actually written right now and what's reported in the table doesn't quite match up.
Member Rollins.
Right. So along a similar line for the post-secondary data, one of the things I didn't really see is a good description on the source of the data and what subsets we pulled for post-secondary. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk us through a little bit of that, and then how these three indicators for post-secondary, and especially where we're looking at the 2023 kind of goal, how those goals and how that metric aligns with the Vision for Success numbers.
So the source of the data is COMIS, or the Chancellor's Office MIS data that's rolled up. And so that's where the data source was.
And this is a specific CTE subset?
Correct. It's the CT concentrators that are pulled. And in terms of the column 6 targets, I think they're using the similar methodology that you see in the secondary, where we're setting the baseline and then trying to move it on a 2-year moving average. Again, I think we can discuss that further in terms of setting aspirational targets as a state, but that's just the current method that was used, similar with the secondary.
So I see on the post-program placement, it looks really, it looks great that on our Vision for Success metric, we're shooting for a goal of 76% overall, and we're already beating that metric, which is fantastic. I think the board will be glad to hear about some of that. But on the others, I just wonder, we're looking at moving fairly aggressively. We're already doing fairly well with this subset on the post-secondary credential, but then on the non-traditional program concentration, it seems like that's a little lagging, and I wonder, how we're looking at that data through the lens of the Vision for Success.
So some of the non-trad data, there's different fields of study that we're trying to break in, different disciplines. When you look at non-trad, you might think of like men in nursing or women in construction. And so we continue to focus. There's been a lot of work in the community colleges to see how we can invite more inclusive programs. And so that continues to be just maybe something that we need to focus on clearly to be able to provide access to all folks into all occupations. So one point of comment to these indicators that I think we need to think about, which I'm going to give Michelle McIntosh the credit for the thought, is the degree to which we have expectations on the secondary level and to which those students achieve are the level to which they are readied for post-secondary education and the degree to which they can achieve our targets. So we have to think about the interrelationships between student readiness on the targets on page 149 and how they feed into the targets on 150, because the degree to which our student success metrics come out are really a degree to which we have a good intersegmental relationship between post-secondary and secondary pathways. So I think there is a way where we can see some alignments and effectiveness as we build these relationships between these two systems.
And I take that last point very well. The alignment with our CTE programs should be much deeper than our traditional students may be. So as we've had to deal with multiple measures and all that for a lot of the general population students, the CTE segment is going to be exceedingly reliant on the performance outcomes at our K-12 partners. So I appreciate that comment.
I just had one follow-up question, and it's related to the state determined performance level, but it's actually in reference to page 133, which is just a little ahead of where we're actually at this particular point of conversation. And it's maybe a little different from what Member Rucker had mentioned about not wanting any change to the narrative before this goes out to commentary. There's a statement here that says the CDE will consult with key informants at several conferences for secondary Perkins recipients about the proposed SDPLs. And then it says that there will be a secondary stakeholder group. If this goes out the way it is right now, how many of our readers will anticipate that that has already taken place in order to populate this table? And I don't want them to think that as though we've already convened a group that got these numbers together. So is there something that we can do when this goes out for draft commentary to almost either condition the table on the fact that these stakeholder groups have yet to convene, or are we indeed saying that these key informants at several conferences have already weighed in on these numbers?
That's a good point, Chair Grande. I think we probably, because we refer to that table, and then we can say that we'll use the table as the springboard to say that we will go out to these groups to talk about that table and get feedback on that table, and maybe that way it's already not done. Staff has worked on those tables, and now we're taking out to key informants, stakeholders, and they will respond on that table and any of the narrative that's in this section.
That would be good. Could you possibly tell me when and where these several conferences are going to be in relation to the timeline that we have?
This is in terms of basically when I think it's given the fact that this was supposed to be approved 2 weeks ago, the conferences were coming up Russ and I just came from a conference 2 days ago, and so there's the JSPEC that's coming up, that's the other, but now that we are sort of not there as yet, I think that language probably needs to be adjusted.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
Vice Chair Sun.
So the table that we're talking about on 149 and 150 are required as part of the application. We need to complete this. The table on page 130 or something, one that says the 137, yeah, talks about connecting state and federal Perkins CTE indicators. This was a table that we created. This is not part of the application, right? All right, to kind of walk us through that. So my question for the table on the required table, 14950, is could we add additional indicators on there other than we can? Okay.
Can add additional.
Okay, so then why don't we just add some of the matrix of metrics indicators as part of that instead of this table here? Because this table only talks about CTIG, but what about strong workforce? So if we're going to do CTIG, we should do strong workforce, and then I think then it becomes very confusing about who's on first. So if we maybe put it on, yeah. So if we maybe took this out and added some key indicators from CTIG and K-12 from the ones that we talked about, as
every indicator we have to come up with a projection. And for that, we need data. And so that's the issue that we have. And so I'm being cautious here and trying to make sure that we don't promise more than we can deliver in some sense.
Totally get that.
Yeah.
Then
The reason I put this table here is to sort of highlight two things. One is the federal is very prescriptive. There are numerators and there are denominators, whereas in CTIG and many other programs, the indicators are rather generally written out in some sense. There are no numerators and denominators, although we can do that. I was just trying to say that at the indicator level, we're measuring the same thing at the state level as we are at the federal level. That's the intent of this table.
I see. So, but then it seems like it's missing the K-12 workforce indicators. So I don't know, if this causes more confusion or less, but it's not incomplete, I guess, if we're going to go with just this.
Member Rucker.
So, everybody started laughing. All right. So this is where we are, and this is not an effort to be confusing. It's just the L-tryptophan is kicking in. So I want to make sure about where we landed. I want to make sure I know where we landed. So there is a difference between what the federal government is requiring for reporting for accountability purposes in this program that's actually narrower than what we look at and analyze and report in our state's current accountability system. And that very narrow focus, in fact, is not even a student subgroup that we disaggregate. So, for purposes of this plan, what we just agreed to do is the chart itself that's in this appendix on page 149 and 50 is going to be reporting about student concentrators, CTE concentrators. So I'm going to recommend, for purposes of the public comment, that in the title where it says State Determined Performance Levels Form, add for reporting on CTE concentrators, so that people know that what's in this form is a report only about CTE concentrators. That will solve in the immediate what's going to go out in a simpler way for the public comment. All right, that's the first thing. The second thing is we understand that in adopting or approving this draft, there are some deficiencies in the draft as it relates to the explanation in the narrative. And we have already asked you to refine the narrative, both in the introductory section, to explain that while our plan is aspirational about the access and equity for all students, that we are accountable in this plan for reporting on the progress of CTE concentrators. That will be clarified in the early sections of our draft document. And then in the section that's directly related to this chart, the narrative is going to be refined to explain not only the data points or the data source this data is based on, but why this data focuses on this concentration so that people know it is a narrower group of students and it is about the accountability for the program itself. Because the narrative for this chart that this chart refers back to doesn't quite make that clear. And so we know that we're going to hear some things from stakeholders. And so while I'm not trying to tell you how to respond to stakeholders, I anticipate that when stakeholders express their concerns about the lower standards, there is going to have to be an explanation about the difference between reporting accountability for all students, as we have become accustomed to, and this single reporting for this single subgroup of students as is required here. So that's where we have left off, and that's both for the K-12 side as well as the community college side. We're asking you, we know that when it's time to revise the draft, that some work will have to be done on that. But at this point, I'm satisfied personally that with the conversation we have today, we understand where the blanks are in the narrative, and we know that some other stakeholders are going to point out the same things we've pointed out, and I can live with those concerns until we come back and see the refined draft after the stakeholder input session closes.
Any other comments?
Are you saying then, for purposes of public, that you would just go with what's currently there with the, or to look at the target in 2023 to be more of the aspirational and move up?
Oh, I thought we said that.
Okay.
I thought we said that we would set the higher target for 2023 to be closer to the statewide goal for all students, so that it automatically sets up a very steep trajectory for the interim goal. So I thought we said that. And then let the public comment go where it's going to go.
All right.
Let's see if there's any comments from David Rattray in Los Angeles.
He's still there. He's so sweet.
Okay. I don't hear anything from him. I'm guessing that he has nothing to add to this section. This section, by the way, was on accountability for results and identifying and including at least one of the following indicators. Any other comments on this section?
Well, that was just the first one.
Yes.
But I think it carries over.
It does.
Don't worry, we won't do the same thing with the other one.
Yeah, because I just think this is where I was saying that I feel like the description of our overarching accountability system, and this is probably why our overarching wasn't nuanced enough to talk about the specific targets that we want to establish, and even the indicators we want to establish for our CTE concentrators. So it's part of the same thing that we've been giving you feedback on. It's just distinguishing that and being more articulating that more clearly.
All right. So does that take care of page 132 and 133? And then we look at page 133 again under procedure for arriving at the SDPL's baseline and targets. We've kind of talked about that as well. So then we can look at the next section, an explanation of the SPDL alignment to statutory requirements, 133 to page 138. And in the track change document, it's pages 194 through 198.
Member Rucker.
Okay, so I think, again, I just want to emphasize, because in our conversations that we had on pages 130 to 132, we actually talked about some of the things that are relevant to this section as well. So again, you gave a great explanation about the architecture of the CCI and the California model for accountability. And I think that it's important to add in an important statement that the accountability for the purposes of this program is more narrow and it requires reporting on a subgroup that our current system does not require under state law. I think you do need to make sure you say that, because again, stakeholders are going to miss that point if we don't make sure we say that.
Yeah, we could say that in 2 sentences. Yeah, perfect.
Any other comments on this section? Let's check in one more time with Los Angeles. David Rattray.
No comment.
Thank you very much. All right.
All right, and then we have an explanation of SDPL alignment to other measures, pages 138 through 141. That's good.
Any other comments on those? Let's check to make sure. Vice Chair Sun.
No, just, well, one page back, that chart, that if we're going to use CTIG, we probably should do something with K-12 on all the metrics that we've been looking at, if that's the way you want to continue with this.
Member Rucker.
I do want to state that when you make the change in the chart, you're going to have to make sure that the numbers you have here in your narrative match up. So for example, on page 140, on their goal, on the statements you've made for the community colleges, it says over 5 years increased by at least 20% the number of community college students who acquire. If you're going to make any adjustments on how those numbers in this chart are adjusted up or down, you may need to double check these statements to see if there's any adjustments that have to be made up or down on that as well.
At the bottom page 140?
Yes.
Actually, that is really, and I'll let Shani talk about that. That is actually from the Vision for Success, which
Okay.
is different from the Perkins Accountability.
Okay, but again, you said that there was a narrower group of students that you're following on this. So, but this is not the same. This is different, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those are targets from our Vision for Success for
For
entire
all
system.
students?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so this goes back to the point that Board Member Sun was making. See, that's the problem with why we're not understanding this disconnect. So the statements you're making here is the increase for all students. How is that going to be reported and reflected in this table? Because that's not what's being reported in that table at this time. So that's where the confusion actually is. So that's why I'm making the point, you're either going to have to change this narrative or change what's reported in the table, because somehow or other what's that data in the table needs to be explained. So that goes back to the conversation we've already had. So I will stick with that point. So
From the conversation, I'd like to suggest that perhaps it would help if we also provide the definitions of those indicators in this document for the public to understand.
No, the public won't understand that. Let me be clear, because when I read this statement and looked at that table, I didn't understand the table, because the data that's written out here on page 140 and 141 do not help me understand the data in the table on page 150. So again, I'm going to say there needs to be an alignment between the goals that are articulated here and what is actually reported for the trajectory of the performance of those goals or the progress toward those goals that's reported on page 50. And right now, that's not clear. So just giving a definition about these terms of art for these goals on page 140 and 141 won't help, because this is about all community college students, but what's being reported in the table on page 150 is just about CTE concentrators. So let me break this down for you in a different way. If the only data you're accountable to report on page 149 and 150 is about CTE concentrators, then the goal statements at the bottom of page 140 and on page 141 need to be about CTE concentrators. You can't have it both ways in this document, because that's what's creating the confusion and the very long and detailed conversation we just had.
My apologies. I meant that we would include definitions of the page 149 and 150 indicators, because they're not included in this document. Those definitions need to be provided.
Yes, that would help.
Member Rawlings?
So I would certainly start there, but I think something else that would be helpful is possibly in this section, at the end, maybe it's what's here on page 141, at the end of the listing of the Vision for Success goals, is part of the conversation and part of the answers to my line of questioning earlier, which is acknowledging the fact that the goals and what we have set on page 150 for post-secondary are naturally going to be different and maybe not at the same scale as all community college students because of the relationship between the CTE programs and the alignment between K-12 and community college CTE programs, and how one will be much more integrated than maybe a traditional liberal studies program might be, right? So maybe expanding on that, and part of Jeff's answer earlier on that would be helpful as part of the dialogue here. Just acknowledging how the alignment from K-12 to community colleges on CTE is different than the general population, and that these are the general population goals, but that those on page 150 take into account the relationship with K-12.
Okay, so let me just say the landmine that was written into what you just said, that was the most elegant way I have ever heard anyone say that the academic expectation goals for CTE is lower than for general education students. Okay, that's not what we intend, but that was really elegant. I got to give you that. I have to give you points for that.
I think particularly on the point is if our CTE students are achieving at a level where we're in the 90 percentile, right, in getting the post-secondary credential, recognized credential, it's hard to improve the 20%, right? But I think we need to be looking at these goals on page 150 through that very lens. Right?
Well, and see, the point that was made from member Salazar from Los Angeles, that when we start talking about, back in that earlier section about soft skills, essential skills, it doesn't matter whether the student is graduating with a CTE credential or an AA degree. Those essential skills are the same thing. They don't get to perform. CTE students don't get to have 80% of those essential skills. They need to be able to demonstrate the same essential skills with the same competence and, may I say, the same confidence as students graduating with those academic credentials. So we have to make sure that if the goal is overall to make sure they graduate with that value added on those soft skills, then there cannot be a gradation or a difference in expectations of outcome.
I agree completely there.
Are there any other comments on this section?
No? All right. We move on to number 4, public comment on SDPL. I don't think there'll be too much discussion on this.
Just waiting for the...
Just waiting for the comments to come back, so that makes it a little bit easier. Now, number 5, addressing disparities and gaps in performance. This is on pages 142 through 144 on your clean document, and pages 202 through 206 on track changes document.
Do we have any comments on this section? Any comments on this section? Vice Chair Sun.
Section under for response, currently the CDE monitors, am I on the right page? 142? Okay. Currently the CDE monitors grantees of Perkins 5 funds for compliance, local recipients are required to review their local levels of performance within their annual Perkins application. Local have not met the state requirement levels, must submit improvement plan. So are we still looking, this is what currently happens. Currently monitors Perkins 5 funds. So if we were to go into a LCAP addendum thing, this process would not change. Is that right?
Not change. I mean, this process will not change. I mean, the big difference between accountability in Perkins 4 and Perkins 5 is the following. Under Perkins 4, it was a year-to-year conversation with the U.S. Department of Education. Now, both the state, that's why you have that table, that both the state as well as the locals who have to accept that table have a 4-year plan, and they would then have to make adjustments along the way as the performance varies from year to year. That's the big difference between Perkins 5 and Perkins 4.
Yeah, okay, that's fine, thank you.
Any other comments on this section? Let's check in with Los Angeles. David Rattray, do you have any comments on this section?
No, looks good to me.
Thank you.
All right. So section E of the plan, basically assurances, certifications, and other required forms from the federal government. We didn't type those up. Those are their forms. We just have to sign off on those. So there's really no discussion on those. And I believe that brings us to the end of our document. Yeah.
We do have a section here for other comments if you have other comments before we move to public comments.
Member Rucker.
Well, first of all, let me begin by saying this is the draft that we're sitting here looking at today is a culmination of a very broad, long discourse, not only about career technical education, but about our relationship as a state entity and the various entities that are involved. So I need to begin by giving my personal appreciation to the staff from every division and department, both at the community college as well as in the Department of Ed, for the work that they have done. You have done yeoman's work, not only in from where we've started to where the conversation has evolved, but in keeping up with this conversation and frankly the very large demands that this panel has made. And I have been a leader in making those particular demands. I was nice, but I have made those demands. And so I think it's important for people to understand this is the rough and tumble of the work that we do at this level. So when stakeholders see this draft, they understand that a lot of work and a lot of deep conversations occurred, not only among ourselves, but with stakeholders. And so this was formed and bonded and blended in a conversation that meant a lot to all the people whose fingers were on this. And so I think that it's important for us to recognize and take a moment to pause and appreciate what this moment actually means. Not just that we can check off an activity, but that we have been thoughtful and purposeful in the work that's been done. A lot of hands have been involved with this. A lot of changes in staff and personnel and engagement has occurred. But the through line for this whole process was to create a document that really articulates what we are trying to do, why we are trying to do it, but more importantly, leads the conversation. We weren't innovative for the sake of innovation. We were looking to be bold for the sake of being better. And I think that that's something we actually accomplished in this draft. So I really want to thank all of the staff, because you're the ones who helped to make what our intent and our goal in doing this work was. You actually did a good job of reading our mind, taking our feedback, and working hard to put it on paper. So I need to take time to say thank you for that.
And I think all of us up here would echo those sentiments. Thank you so much.
This Member Rucker says so articulately, so I hate to follow her. I also just want to thank you, the staff, for their hard work on this. I know it wasn't easy. I know we're extremely demanding, and you did it. And I will say that 3 months ago, I was feeling like we had stalled, and I'm feeling a little bit frustrated because we had worked on these concepts and we had been talking about this for 2 years now. Today, I feel like we made a huge leap forward. So I thank you all for getting us to where we are. We have more work, but this is a great, great start. And I really appreciate all the hard work and the collaboration you all had to go through to do this. So thank you.
Without any more comments up here, let's see what the public has to say. I invite members of the public to step forward, state your name and where you're coming from or institution being represented. And if I could ask that you might keep your comments to 3 minutes. You can tell that they are equally as impressed with the work product of staff.
The L-tryptophan kicked in.
Yeah, maybe so. So let me ask from Los Angeles, David Rattray, do you have anything else that you would like to add regarding our first agenda item?
Yes, just one comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, I too commend the staff and all involved in this and my colleagues. But I guess one thing in the spirit of this idea that this committee was originally formed with the idea that we are going to help guide California on career education in an Uber way, kind of macro, writ large, and not let a Perkins plan or any one fund sort of wag the dog or be the tail that wags the dog. So I guess the one thing I'm just thinking is, when we put this out to the field, I worry about them getting the signal that it's business as usual, that this is our CTE plan and our career workforce plan. So I wonder if it's important to communicate to the field, as we open it up for comment, that we do intend to have a larger state plan on this issue, and we are working on that next, and help the whole field realize that this is a subset of a larger issue, so we don't give everybody the sense business as usual, that we're still in a compliance modality.
That's a very important point to note. So I'll ask either Pradeep or Russ, are we going to be giving any sort of context when we put this out for public commentary regarding where this fits in the overall scheme of the state plan?
The way the public comments work is, and we're working with our partners at West Ed Comprehensive Center, the way it works is we go there and we give a short presentation to whoever is there, and they would then come in and essentially that reference sheet, they will come in and write in their comments. So in that initial presentation that we do, we can include this overarching focus that Member Rattray talked about and say that this is just one part of a larger comprehensive state CTE plan. And so we could include that as so that it's clear that they will be commenting on the document, the Perkins 5 state plan, but there's efforts going on, and that will bring back and talk more about the state plan.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that I was overhearing Russ, and he said at the presentations we've already made, we've already explained to the folks that were in attendance that we do plan on making this bigger plan. The other thing too is we have the public meetings coming up on Monday. We have another one coming up on the 9th that we just scheduled here in Sacramento, and we can absolutely add that to the slides because the slide deck will also be posted. And so just multiple ways to get the information out so people know that this isn't the end. We still have a journey to go.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that feedback. So the agenda item before us seeking a motion currently is to accept the draft California Perkins 5 state plan to move forward for public comment. So is there a motion?
Can I make, or should I make a motion and then clarify?
Go right ahead. Make the motion and then we'll get a second. Then we'll let you clarify.
Okay, I'll make the motion.
Very well. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Very good. Go right ahead.
And if I could just clarify that the motion includes not every little, we have substantive conversation on accountability. We're not asking that you incorporate everything in the accountability section, but there were some sections that seem like you could be done fairly quickly, and you will go out to the public with those changes. Is that right?
That's
okay. Okay.
So we have a motion that was made by Vice Chair Sun, seconded by Member Rawlings, that we do indeed feel comfortable moving this draft California Perkins 5 state plan forward for public comment. Are we ready for the roll call?
All right, here we go. Chair Grande.
Aye.
Member Rawlings.
Aye.
Member Rucker.
Absolutely, aye.
Ooh, I love that. And Vice Chair Sun.
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion has passed. We are ready to put this out for public commentary. Accolades, accolades, accolades. Oh.
Can I, Madam Chair, I know that I'm ex officio, so I don't have an official vote, but I'd like to just be on the record as also supporting. And I know Alma, I can't do a proxy for Alma, but I know she has told me that she's very supportive of the current plan.
I will ask, will the CDE make certain that ex officio member Rattray's vote in support of sending this forward for public commentary be reflected in the meeting minutes?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. We have members of the public who have been in attendance for this meeting since 10, if not 10:30 this morning. So are there any other members of the public that would like to provide comments on anything that may or may not have been presented during today's meeting? I would ask that you step forward, state your name, the institution or organization that you represent, and keep your comments brief. I see none. So are there any other comments from committee members, including our ex officio member in Los Angeles?
Chair Grande, I just want to just so that it's for the record, so that we talk about this. We have the project timeline, and then we've gone through that, and you have an attachment in there. The two things that we want to talk about is that we are creating a December memo for the state board that will go to the state board, and I think a parallel one will for the Board of Governors as well. And then we'll come back to you in January after the public comment and present an updated version of that plan. And then in March 2020 meeting, we'll have the official presentation to the state board for approval, as well as the Board of Governors as an information item, then going on to the governor's office for the office's review, and then hopefully by April, no later than April 15th, we'll submit the plan to the U.S. Department of Education.
Member Rucker.
And while you're at the microphone, could you also explain about the public comment? Because sometimes people are confused about what that means. I want to make sure they understand to submit their comments and letters through the portal, not to send or address their letters directly to members of the board or the Board of Governors for the community college, because that is going to be the only way that you can collect the information and the input to use to inform the update or revision. So could you kind of explain that to be clear?
That I'm going to the next slide about the public sessions. So we have basically 4 public sessions if you include the times. One a week from Monday and a week from today in North Orange County Community College District, from 10 to 12, 1 to 3. And I plan to be there at that meeting and will do the brief presentation. And as I said in my when we first started this conversation today, we will follow the reference sheet in terms of, so they will be writing, they will be given that and they can either identify that and then write on cards, basically saying, this is our comment or this is our question, and then we just collect that. At that time, like we have in board meetings, we're not supposed to respond to them at that time. We just collect that information and then call all of that together and then respond that. And as you suggested, Member Rucker, some of it can go into the text and some may be just a response that's left in the appendix. And so that's how we do that. We also had the online version of that.
A little bit about that.
Yeah, that follows the same pattern, except it's an online version with that same reference sheet that they have, and they will go through that, and they will essentially be going through all of the sections and subsections, and then putting in their comments. And at the end of that, we will be collecting some demographic information and their affiliation, so that we have a sense of the type of stakeholder that that has responded to that, and that's really the intent of that.
Can you elaborate just a little bit more on the website? Will it include the slide deck that will have been presented at December 2nd, or a video introduction regarding how we anticipate using it and collecting these responses?
We're working with West Ed on that, and we're having conversations. So that's a good suggestion, is maybe we record. We will, so either it's a recording or we'll ask instructions. Please look at this slide deck, and then essentially, given that they will have access to the plan, and they will look at, so I'm assuming that they would have read that for them to come and have comments on particular sections of the plan that they might be interested in. And that, so we will be providing materials to them, even on the online version, so they can get access to that. And there's no time constraint there, because they can do that, I assume, reading the material and then going and answering the question.
Any other comments regarding? Okay. Well, then maybe now would be a good time to remind everyone about the December 2nd meeting at North Orange, as well as the December 9th meeting that is going to be at West Ed in Sacramento?
Yes, it's the Christopher Center building, West Ed offices, Capitol Room.
Very good. All right. Are there any other announcement that you wanted?
I just wanted this to be on the record so it'll be recorded.
There actually is one more thing. So we will have the 2 sessions on December 2nd in Orange County. We will have 2 sessions here in Sacramento on December 9th. We are working with the Chancellor's Office because they would like to do a web meeting in addition to these. So that date has not been determined yet because that just came bubbling up last Friday.
We do have a date.
It is, okay, are you ready? We have brand new news. What's the date?
It is Friday the 9th. We have 2 sessions, one at
Friday the 6th.
Friday the 6th. I got it inverted there. Friday the 6th, and it's 2 sessions, one at 10 and one at 2.
And both of these are online?
It'll be online webinar format.
Can I ask the staff if you could send us the dates with the times and addresses and all that?
Yes, we can do that. We will also be posting it on the California Workforce Advisory Committee webpage. We're going to create a new section on the top before the principles are posted on the state plan. So we'll have Perkins 5 there. We'll have all the meeting dates. We can have the links to the web conferences and try to get as much information out as we can.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments on this item? Otherwise, we might just be at the point of reviewing the next meeting date. It looks as though we do not see each other again formally for the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee during the month of December, but we do have on our calendars our next meeting, which is Friday, January 31st, 2020, from what appears to possibly be 10 to 3, though I'm guessing that there may have been an adjustment on time.
Well, actually, that date I'm not available, so I will not be present. I'll be there for the others.
Now would be a good time to note that these dates are tentative and may be updated depending on the availability of the members. With that being said, I'd love to thank once again everyone who was able to make it here today, not only on short notice, but the fact that our staff and our representatives from CDE and the State Board and the Board of Governors worked diligently over the last 2 weeks to get this plan where it is today so that it can go out for public commentary beginning on December 2nd and closing on January 3rd. It is open for a requisite 30 plus days, 32 all together. And I am looking forward to seeing the analysis of those feedback results and the inclusion of the responses to those within our draft state plan. If there is no other business to come before the Workforce Advisory Committee, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn and thank everyone in attendance for the most productive of meetings. Is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Very well. It is currently 3:11, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays. Happy Thanksgiving. You worked really hard,
Bye-bye.
and we are grateful.